Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know.
as
It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
Even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
In some respects, it's just as bad now, the authoritarianism that is coming, Gerald. I am really, really fearful for the President of the United States of America to suggest, as he did on Air Force One on Sunday night, that American citizens could be deported, for his press secretary to say, we're looking into a way to see if this is legal. We don't know if it's legal or not. A, is terrifying. B, betrays such a profound ignorance of first principles to which he is sworn. He is sworn to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and to enforce federal law.
You mentioned that you're open to deporting individuals that aren't foreign aliens but are criminals to El Salvador. Does that include potentially U.S. citizens, fully naturalized Americans?
If they're criminals and if they hit people with baseball bats over their head that happen to be 90 years old, and if they rape 87-year-old women in Coney Island, Brooklyn, yeah, that includes them. What do you think? There's a special category of person? They're as bad as anybody that comes in. We have bad ones too.
Profoundly un-American, utterly unconstitutional, and I'm sorry to say, is coming.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Monday, May 5th, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. It just keeps getting crazier. Every day, the escalation of the same conversation, it just keeps getting more real and more serious, and it seems that more and more people that decide to not want to see it push back, make up more arguments, but this just keeps getting more obvious. And it's really interesting, and I think very revealing to see people who try to make arguments. I mean, I was just being told on major radio stations today that they were discussing that very statement and defending that what he said is correct. In fact, despite the reality that what he says is that he doesn't know and that we're going to find the nuance, it's insane to me. Now, we're going to make a point about that at the end of the show, since we've already really, I think, as much as you can, broken down the reality of that conversation. There's no nuance to the idea of whether illegal aliens or anybody else have rights under the Constitution. And yet what they're trying to do is create situations where you can rationalize why it's okay to ignore it. Now, maybe you don't frame it that way in your mind, but that's what's happening. Why it's okay for, in this exception, that the Constitution doesn't apply. And all that does is kick open the door, well, long since been kicked open in my opinion, but one more precedent for these power-hungry maniacs to take away the last bit of what we think we can use to hold them accountable, or what we can use to influence. When I say think, only because I think most of what holds this together is just the last kind of tendrils of opportunism of the people that use it. But nonetheless, they need you to think this all goes the way it used to. But as I said, we've gone over this extensively on the show, well before the current conversation, but we'll touch on that at the end, because I think the video speaks for itself. If you understand the basic fundamental shall not be infringed and alienable rights of the Constitution and how the literal words apply to everybody in this country. But hey, and we're back. back in live. Don't know how that seems to happen these days with gig direct connection or one gig up and down direct fiber connection. That's what we're dealing with today, but that's how this tends to work. But let me know in the chat before I keep going that you guys can indeed hear what I'm saying. Even though I'm seeing a live image, let me know. I'm going to be getting into the overlapping point that we've been discussing for quite a while, which is the general point of Israeli infiltration of this government. And it's hardly a secret conversation right now. Let me just double check here. Okay, yeah, we're good. We're back up and running. So the point is, it is obviously a major discussion right now that's being debated at the highest levels of damn near everything, and yet weirdly still gets carved out as like you're racist if you even have this conversation from very certain parts of the conversation. What I've been trying to highlight for a long time, as well as a lot of, in fact, plenty of other people that have been doing it for decades longer than I have, and I point to their work damn near every time we talk about this, in regard to people that are highlighting the infiltration of the tech field by specifically Israeli intelligence. I mean, it is literally everywhere you look. I reference usually when I have this conversation, the article Whitney wrote for TLAV back in, I think it was 2023, 24, and it's called The Prince and the Spy. She also posted on Unlimited Hangout. That is a conversation of Eric Prince and Israeli spies and the overlap and how they use him to essentially get their foot in the door. But one of the main parts in there is about how, whether it's Carbine 911 or just Carbine now, other companies, that these are essentially extensions of the Israeli intelligence apparatus. And it's not even secret. They've written articles about today we'll make that even more clear for those that still think that's not the reality. But many different ways they make sure you understand that that's the reality of this, that their intelligence tendrils or connections are continuing to, either while they're still active in the community or they're no longer part of it, build tech companies that they then openly state are for the interest of Israel and their intelligence apparatus. The problem is that we've seen this develop with like the pager conversation in Lebanon and other places where they make it clear they're willing to just insanely violate the law, commit terrorist acts, and call it freedom. But what we try to show in this country well before this administration is how much the Israeli government has worked its way into controlling policy, surveillance, as Whitney's covered, 911 call centers, water infrastructure, medical infrastructure. I mean, very real-time conversations of exactly the national security risks that they use to point at anybody else. And today we're going to highlight a story that's been going around for a few days now. I think the first and the second is when the first part of this really broke. And we've already mentioned this the last couple shows, I think, yesterday more so than ever. And this is about the conversation of Mike Waltz and the Iran conversation and how this all went down. I'll have a couple points about that. What I found more interesting is the whole signal overlap, going back to Hegseth, the signal point, and the Yemen conversation, and how Israel was upset that they were involved with that chat. Remember, that came out early that they were upset about something involved with that. Okay. And then we get to the point, we have the signal gate or whatever they called it. And then we get to the point to where now it's being revealed that there was a hack through this. And we'll get into the kind of opaque part of who that hacker may be and so on. But this is very important that this is because of the use of what Mike Waltz was caught using of what's called telemessage, which is an Israeli intelligence linked, essentially an archive. You connect it with your signal and it archives your signal conversations and everybody involved with them and sends it back to the cloud, or in this case, Israeli servers. That's what this is about. Of course, we're nothing nefarious. We're just helping you archive your conversations, except now we see how this is playing out. And it turns out the State Department's been using it for a long time. So is the CDC. So is the HHS. And this is profoundly important. And see, this what people will try to make it into, like everything today is some kind of current partisan divide, that you're on Trump's side or you're on the Democrat side. This is all of them. That's the insane part about this. Mike Waltz and the overlap, I think, just made this clumsily obvious. And of course, we keep seeing how things are being shuffled around and they're trying to make it about who was actually wanting to go to war with Iran, when it seems like all of them are different flavors and shades of how much they want to go to war with Iran. I think what happened there was that something got exposed. And they had to move Mike Waltz out of the way because he's one of the most prolifically outspoken Zionists, all about Israel, which probably is most of Trump's cabinet. And so if they're all using this, even just signal, by the way, and are compromising in possible ways with that, but overlapping that with the telemessage dynamic, which they all seem to be using, realistically, this just seems like Israel's just completely tapped into every function of the current executive branch, or maybe all of it. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing how this is coming out, and the focus is on anything but that. And of course, the overlap with the ongoing wars, the overlap with, the health dynamic in this country with the Stargate program and the technocratic drive, globalism, everything we're seeing build is coming from what I think is this central driving force. And that's not to say one group or the other. Or understand it's about a kind of collaboration of a lot of different interests, but it ultimately does come down to driving forces. But what I'm going to start with here, before we get into anything else, just as an interest, 2 notes actually. One is an image of going underground video that I think is just important to see, that I definitely see overlapping in a lot of ways, but I'll let you place it where you will, that I wanted to include. It doesn't really relate to the rest we're getting into, except for the obvious overlaps. And then a few of the points from yesterday's show, just to cite really quickly in 1 minute, to make sure you didn't miss the kind of highlights of yesterday's show, which were buried throughout it, which are very important. Now, first is this video. And this is really interesting.
Answer why your son allows Starlink to be used by Ukrainian troops, or is that because of a contract?
This is Elon Musk's father. He's speaking with Elon Musk's father about Starlink and use with Ukraine, and a very interesting piece of information comes up, which certainly could be made up, but it's interesting to hear who it's saying it and what it's about.
Actual thing. It's not Elon Musk saying to Zelensky, "Yeah, use this for the navigation systems for drones to attack Russian troops."
Yes. No. Elon's approach. He's a businessman. He has a system. It's meant to help people. It's not meant to be used by one side against the other. And if you are going to be given, if you're going to be judged properly, you would naturally offer this to both sides. Now, he did cancel Starlink when there was talk of Ukraine attacking Sebastopol. He cancelled Starlink for the Ukraine, and he provided Starlink for the Ukraine at the very beginning of the conflict because it was the common sense thing to do.
But your understanding is it's being used now again, and he has the ability to switch it off. So why doesn't he switch it off?
Well, the minute he switches it off, he'd be, taking sides, and that's not what his job is. If we can just jump a bit to Israel, shortly after the horrible events of October the 7th, in a month or two after that, the Hamas actually contacted me, the leaders of Hamas contacted me to ask me if I could persuade Elon to give Hamas Starlink. And I did. I got hold of Elon. I said, look, there are two sides to this argument, and Elon agreed, and he gave them Starlink on the basis that
it's sure about that?
Yes, I am sure about that. He gave them Starlink because the idea was, the suggestion was, from Starlink's point of view, that it should be there for humanitarian purposes. So
because most people think Elon Musk is completely partisan, and I know you've said Netanyahu is a family friend, and that
yes, but that doesn't mean that you do away with all fairness. In our family, and speaking for myself and my son, and we see that in every situation there are two sides to every argument.
Well, isn't that fascinating? Now, personally, that's obvious. I mean, with how much manipulation and psychological anything's possible and always has been. And whether or not this guy's lying for an interest of something else, his son asked him, who knows? Or maybe that's the reality. What I think is fascinating about it is taking for sake of conversation. And I mean, since it's his father and he seems to be speaking with some kind of insight, maybe he wasn't supposed to say it. The interesting thing is, as we keep seeing with Starlink, right? Every single time we've seen Starlink deployed in some kind of guise of humanitarianism, it has been before or in the midst of an important shift in a warfare dynamic. Every single place we've seen, in regard, even the Honduras overlap is basically a technocratic takeover of land in Honduras, or any other dynamic like that, or a conversation of, what was the last one we just saw? Was it the Sudan? I forget which one it was. The point was, yet again, another example of more warfare. What we have to recognize, in my opinion, at least as I see it, that we know it's a part of it. I see it as a central part, if not the only part, in my opinion. That Starlink is a part of the Defense Department kind of technocratic government control structure apparatus. Like, it is about using that, not just for warfare, but that's the clear, I guess, foot in the door. But, there's plenty of ways to frame that. But overall, that this is about something that is about the growing kind of control structure, as Catherine Austin Fitts calls the digital grid, surveillance grid. I mean, it's very clear how this all comes together. So that first point, I think, is interesting, that he talks about that happening in any context, but then he says Hamas, that he gave it to Hamas right after October 7th. I mean, how in the world does that possibly make sense to anybody? Now, of course, again, he could just be mistaken, I guess. But think about what that would mean. Whether that means that that was all there beforehand, or whether that implies some kind of a deeper connection to the foreknowledge, right? The idea that everyone knew what was going to happen beforehand. There's all this big gap there. I mean, all these weird examples of the whole let it happen kind of dynamic, or, any number of these weird points that if Starlink was there and he's working with Hamas, like, wouldn't that be a huge issue? Like, what, even like a legal sense? They're saying a terrorist organization. You're helping supply them with, or how would Israel be okay with that? Netanyahu being a close family friend. I mean, all these different points there. I just think, it's just understand, again, very clearly, this is all subjective. Like, this is coming from a guy, as much as it's Elon's father, that's making a statement that's backed up by nothing but who he is. So only thing I find fascinating, assuming we can prove that more, is what that would imply, and worth the thought experiment to think about how that might connect with the rest of the things we're seeing. And personally, I think it's more of an indication of how this is, one big interconnected thing we're seeing. And what that is one more example that this was more than just one event in one location, that we're seeing pieces moved into place. I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, here is the actual tweet. As always, so you can check it out for yourself. Going underground does good work. Now, yesterday's show, amendment stopping deportation of U.S. citizens was voted down by by Republicans. But again, to understand, as always, I don't think it's left and right in all this. I think they play their sides when they need to, and whether they know that or not, I think you can prove that over history. But either way, the idea that any American would vote down something that would explicitly state simply and solely that you cannot deport U.S. citizens, which, by the way, you don't need an amendment to make that case. That's already the law. It's like saying a law that says you have the right to own a gun. You don't need to pass a new law that says that, seeing as how we already know that. So it's one of the worries was that they make these things happen, so we then wonder whether it's defined or not when it already is, despite all of it. Literally voted down something saying you couldn't deport U.S. citizens. So whether this is all a big ploy and hype to get us looking somewhere else or not, things like that seem to come real today. Even if it was built on an idea of just like Greenland or Panama, like that was all a big troll until it kind of became real. And maybe it seems like it's going to happen. Panama sure as hell actually happened. The point is, whether they were meant to be real or not, they kind of have a habit of coming real. And so it worries me. And frankly, I think it's not a ploy. I think that the idea of deporting Americans is something that is very important for where this all goes, and has nothing to do with America First. And RFK Jr.'s universal flu vaccine platform also happening. But in case you missed yesterday's show, there's a couple of quick bullet points I want you to hope you don't miss. On top of everything else we're seeing, and Trump floating the idea on top of El Salvador of sending deported people to Rwanda and Libya for a third world safe country, even though if you look it up, those are two of the most, specifically Libya is like one of the most dangerous places. Like if you ask your own government or anybody else if it's safe to even travel there, they'll say no. And yet we're going to send them there to be safe. And people that they claim were just seeking asylum. So if you come to the gate seeking asylum, looking for the American dream, we're told, he's telling you we're going to send you over to Libya and put you in a prison. In this case, Alabama, on top of this, on the 30th, said, we're going to look to pass legislation to send inmates to foreign prisons. See, that's how this happens. So let's just say that was all sort of a joke or a ploy or a troll. Well, suddenly Alabama doesn't care. Alabama's personally, as a state, trying to pass laws that allow them to send their own prisoners, American prisoners, to foreign countries. And then once that happens, if it does, well, now we're see how that gets loosened up. And now suddenly they're going to say, well, you're a bad criminal. Let's send you there too. All of this is so wildly and easily proven to be unconstitutional. It's sad to me that so many Americans don't seem to know that. And I think it's being led by groups that do know that but don't care. On top of that, RFK Jr.'s HHS ordered labs to study labs studying deadly infections to stop research. Fort Detrick. If you just read the headline, you okay, yay, he's doing good. Well, that's not what's actually happening. If you read the article, the main point is that there's a problem. NIH has implemented what they call a safety stand down at Fort Detrick yet again. The decision follows identification and documentation of personal issues involving contract staff and that compromise the facility's safety culture. That's exactly what happened before the COVID-19 dynamic. Exactly the same thing. The shutdown, the leak, all of it. Now, or whether it really happened or not is for you to decide. The narrative, we heard the same. So who knows if this becomes something else or not. But I think it's interesting how that gets framed and how people online are acting like he's going after Fort. No, this is a claimed shutdown because of a potential leak. That's just interesting to note for if something happens forward, but also because they're still doing all this stuff. Now, also, as Mary Talley Bowden points out, we have open Pandora's box. These are all the mRNA products that in the pipeline, according to Grok. Moderna's got 48 of them. BioNTech, CureVac, that's Elon Musk. Pfizer. These are all mRNA. Now, that's not all the government making that happen, but the government is funding a lot of these, like we know with the bird flu shot. We also have NIH, HHS, Universal Vaccine Platform. Now, it doesn't say mRNA, but like I said before, if you guys have insight into this, let me know. I don't know how it can be a platform dynamic without being mRNA, but I'm not an expert. So it's interesting it's happening either way. And these are not what people said was what we wanted. On top of that, Republicans moved to vote to stop ICE from deporting U.S. citizens. Same point. I just put that in twice. That's the one from earlier. Oh, actually, no, I hadn't showed the link, the article. That's what it is. I just showed the title, but that's the article. And literally easy to read. It's not a secret. It's not some Democrat ploy. It's exactly what it looks like. Of course, also, if you didn't know this, and this is Ryan Grimm, Drop Site News, very important article. Secret Bukele deal lies behind Trump's El Salvador deportations. Exactly what I was worried about, that I felt around this, that it seems there are deals between this dictator, who he calls himself a dictator, and trying to get people back to his country. My gut tells me it's also people that are dissidents. They just have something to say about him that he doesn't like, because overall, it's about MS-13 gang members that you can prove he made deals with. There's evidence all over the place that's been highlighted, and this goes back to the U.S. government calling that out. Different parts of our government saying he made deals with MS-13 to basically coordinate on some illusion of cracking down on crime. And now he wants them back because he's worried about what they might say in front of U.S. courts. And at least that's the argument. So there's so much going on here that shows that a deal with the devil is what this looks like. Acting like we're saving democracy by working with the worst people in the world. Saudi Arabia, Israel, the ones that are obviously committing the most human rights violations, but it's okay because they have the right kind of politics or whatever game you play. Insane to me. Now, of course, this is what we're going to start with. Former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was caught using telemessage Signal, an Israeli modifying version of Signal, which archives features to receive and relay potentially classified information, or anything you're using on that app. So whether the people that know it or not, Trump, whoever else, Hegseth, or by the way, other chats we're going to get to in a second that include people like Tucker Carlson, Mark Anderson, who are involved in these same Signal chats. And I'm willing to argue that it's the same problem. And all of this is being funneled back through totally not an America First conversation. This is really important. Now, again, this is something that's been going on for the last few days. But what I want to get into is some of the specifics in this that aren't really getting focused on by the quasi-mainstream part of this conversation. Now, before we get to that, we were mentioning yesterday the boycott bill, yet another one. Never stops in this country, it seems, even though, and somehow we can't manage to wrap our minds around this same thing that always happens that never, that is fundamentally unconstitutional, whether it's anti-BDS or anything else. And it always seems to be about one foreign government, and yet we can't have an honest conversation about what that is and how that shows you exactly what we're talking about. But Khaleesi says the bill has now been pulled. Now, that is a good thing. But I wonder, I think there's two ways to look at it. This is one more effort to drive even more in for the Israeli government. And because most Americans left and right don't want this, regardless, they do it anyway every time. But there was too much pushback, so they pulled back and waited. Secondarily, I get the sense there's more to this about rationalizing the other ones that already exist, or rather hiding that. Because there are plenty of bills right now, whether anti-BDS or actually anti-boycott. Because this one was about extending this out to other governments or the UN discussing these things and you supporting that. Right now in this country, whether this is pulled back or not, there's already bills in law that say you're not allowed to boycott Israel. Now, whether that's enforced is another conversation. We'll go over that. But good news that this was pulled back. Up to $1 million in fines, $20 in prison. Or $20, 20 years in prison. For an American, you understand, for exercising your First Amendment rights. Now let's secondarily stand over here and reflect on people like Khalil and Ozturk and other people who are here legally, who are currently in prison for speech. And let's pretend like that's not the exact same conversation. Or the 100 times Trump has said openly that he will censor you for Israel, and we pretend like that's not the case. Gen X Girl points out Mike Lauer, who's the agent behind this, sponsored 50 pro-Israeli bills, money for Israel, weapons for Israel, technology for Israel, censor criticism of Israel, criminalize freedom of assembly, criminalize boycotts of Israel, sanction UN employees because of Israel. Of course, he has over almost $700,000 in donations from Israeli lobby groups. And here he is saying on the 4th, the Anti-Boycott Act, this is the one from 2018. So all those pretending like this is some kind of massive, like that this was what you're going to get is a lot of people on the right that want to make this seem as if that was the one thing that proves they're not actually controlled by Israel, or that they're not blinded, basically not America first. But forgetting the fact that they already have bills right now like this, or laws. And let's be clear, plenty of other precedents, by the way, but Mayberry versus Madison is one of the best to cite, in my opinion. If it is repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. That is Supreme Court ruling. There's more that make the same case. The argument is just because they pass a law that says something does not make it constitutional. And if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it is null and void according to the Supreme Court. So let's be clear. It's not just Donald Trump's administration right now that violates Supreme Court rulings or the law in general of the land and Constitution. But nonetheless, it exists. The Anti-Boycott Act was passed into law in 2018 to prevent U.S. businesses from participating in boycotts against American allies pushed by foreign governments. Now, see, that's the subjective part of this, where they claim you're falling for what Russia wants, and there's no evidence to back that up. And even if it was, it's still your right to think what you want. But it says this expands existing federal law to any boycott organized by IGOs like the United Nations. That was the newest part of it. President Trump signed the first bill into law. Of course he did, because this is nothing new. This is simply holding the UN accountable. The UN, see, this is about clearly what Israel wants. And whether it's about the UN or some terrorist organization, the point is, as an American, you can think and say what you want. You could boycott what you want. The idea that they argue that doing things and saying things, or rather thinking things and saying things, is somehow against the law, there's laws in the books for all of that. If you give material support to a group that's illegal, then that law exists already. This is not the same thing. They're trying to conflate your ideas with crimes, because that's totally constitutional, right? Which, by the way, only exists in the realm of Israel. From Americans. Explain to me how that's not the most obvious thing in the world. You can criticize every way. You could boycott the American government in front of Washington, D.C., in front of the White House, but you can't, in the United States, boycott Israel. Same point everybody makes. It's that clear. President Trump signed the first bill into law, simply holding the UN accountable. He says, was President Trump virtue signaling when he signed the original bill? And when did you become defender? So basically what he's trying to say is that Trump, well, what he's trying to do is call out Gates down here, who's trying to, I argue, be opportunist and saying we shouldn't do this. But, maybe some of them really have a line when it comes to Israel. It's hard for me to believe that when you see what they've done. The point is, these are people defending this. The laws already exist. Now, Charlie Kirk, and this is my point, there's an interesting divide right now amongst the right. And I don't know where to define it, whether it is just people like this who are recognizing they'll lose too much following if they admit they do want this, or they do whatever they're paid to say. I don't know. Opportunism or not, the point is there does seem to be a line, whether opportunism or not, for a lot of the people where they come out and say, well, that's too far. And he says, tomorrow the House will vote on this bill, HR 867, a bill that will criminalize private boycotts of Israel. He said, bills like this only create more anti-Semitism. That's the design, quite frankly, and play into growing narratives that Israel is running the U.S. government, which it is. This is him playing his game in here. The point is, what this is meant to do is create the hatred towards the group they tell you is running behind all of this, Jewish people, which is what Netanyahu and all the rest are saying. We're doing all this to protect Jews, and it's all about the state of the Jews alone. And then when you turn around and incorrectly, because he's baiting you, say, yeah, it's all because of the Jews. Well, they go, see, we need all of this because everybody hates the Jews. It is this constant and clumsy thing that everyone can see right now. The bottom line is, yes, it does involve a Jewish supremacist overlap that B'Tselem will call out. That's the Zionist influence, but there's a massively growing number of Jews, Orthodox and otherwise, that are calling this out. Zionism does not represent us. And that's not to say Judaism is all good and everything's fantastic and Zionism is all bad and all evil. The point is, very clearly, there's always nuance. There are people that believe one thing and fight for something else. The bottom line is, if you try to make it about one thing alone, you're lying to yourself, because you can prove that's not the case. There are Christian Zionists, there are even atheist Zionists in Israel that are prominent. If you don't know how to make sense of that, then you're not paying attention. So the problem is, he comes out and makes the case, rightly so, that it will create more anti-Semitism, but to downplay the idea that Israel, not the Jews, Israel and their government are absolutely, might as well be driving the bus of the United States government. In America, he says, if you are allowed to hold different views, or you are allowed to disagree and protest. We've allowed far too many people to hate America move here from abroad, but the right to speak freely is the birthright of all Americans. The idea, it's the same kind of idea, but he's playing this very tight line. If you really pushed it, these people would censor you if you are on the wrong side of a conversation. And they've already made that clear 40 times over. Even with this, even the idea, even Israel, these people are the ones that wanted to shut down people protesting. So let's not pretend like they mean what they're saying here. He says the bill should not pass. Any Republican that votes for this bill will expose themselves. See, it's always like all or nothing, right? Absolutism. They're all on our side or on the other side. You're either with us or you're against us. That's not the reality, guys, but that's how they get you pulled into these things. And now people pretend like he's somehow totally not playing the same game we can all see. Alex Jones, same thing. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene said, I'll be voting no, which I'm glad to see. I sense opportunism, but you can decide. Alex Jones literally says today, how is this even real? It's just, how do you even supposed to take something like that? And I said, gotta laugh at this false confusion, sort of like the Tucker G, gosh golly kind of thing, reacts like he hasn't heard the things people like Catherine Austin Fitz are saying, even though and it's been dismissed. The point is, gotta laugh at this false confusion from the man who ignored the obvious that many of us were shoving in his face. And by the way, this is just yet another of many unconstitutional anti-boycott or anti-BDS bills that those you blindly support have always backed. You think he doesn't know that? How is this even real? Because you obviously know it and have been ignoring it the entire time. And now, yes, I'm glad it hasn't passed. But the point is it already exists. And here again is the link to Trump saying 17 times over that he will censor you for Israel. We'll get rid of the Jew haters. We'll get rid of whatever they want to argue. And even if they're actually people who just hate Jews for no reason, that's not illegal. And you have a right to think and say what you want. But the truth is they're framing people who want to fight for Palestine as Jew haters, and you damn well know it. And frankly, the overlap is, whether the point is that on the side, like if you want to really make an argument about racism, the people who are now across the world screaming about racism are some of the most racist people on the planet. Now here is the bill itself, pulled as an article from yesterday, as GOP defends right to boycott Israel. Now, I wouldn't frame it as the GOP defends the right to boycott Israel, because quite frankly, the GOP is largely what's driving this bill. But either way, there are some of them that are pushing back on this. An amendment to the Anti-Boycott Act of 2018, because this is the idea. It's an amendment to add on to the original act passed by Donald Trump's last administration, was pulled from a Monday scheduled vote. Announced Sunday evening after initial news about the vote drew mass opposition. From across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians alike voiced their opposition. Yes, because it's unconstitutional. The idea that if anything, we can get on board together at something basic like the First Amendment. But even then, they find ways to wedge these issues right in between all of us. And it says, voice their opposition to the Intergovernmental Organization, or IGO, Anti-Boycott Act, waging concern that it stands as an affront to the First Amendment by compelling speech in business transactions. It's not the way they frame it as if we're debating this. This is absolute. It's obvious. This is an idea that you cannot boycott something. If you can't piece together that that's a violation of your ability to make your own ideas, then you're lying to yourself. So this is not up for debate. What they're doing is unconstitutional. If you want it, then argue, I'm okay violating the Constitution where it suits my interests. Otherwise, you're being dishonest with yourself. It says, quote, thank you for your vocal opposition on this platform. It was a ridiculous bill that our leadership should never have scheduled for a vote. That was Marjorie Taylor Greene, I believe. Under the Anti-Boycott Act of 2018, an American individual, this is what already currently exists, regardless of this amendment being pushed away for now. I argue it will come back under another form and another idea, under some new, buzz issue that happens that justifies why it should happen another way. Some of the new migrant issue, another shooting, whatever it is, some framing to get you to go, oh, now we need that thing again for a totally different reason. Happens every time. But in 2018, the act, an American individual, company, or organization participating in or supporting a boycott of a U.S. ally, they damn well know who they're pointing to, imposed by a foreign government, can be fined up to $1 million and receive up to 20 years in prison. If H.R. 867 were to pass, it would extend this penalty to Americans participating in boycotts of U.S. allies promoted or endorsed by intergovernmental organizations, such as the United Nations or European Union. So as of right now, see, half the people talking about this online already don't understand this. Right now, they're already in a situation where they can do what everyone kind of thinks this was supposed to do. This was a broadening out of it to argue that you couldn't, because what they recognize are international community-led efforts, the ICC, the ICJ, the United Nations, even the European Union. If the European Union decided to make a case about why what they're doing is illegal, That would be prominent, guys. Whether you agree with what their intentions are or not, they know how important that would be and how much influence it would get. So they're trying to get ahead of it because they see the writing on the wall. It says, but as it stands, there are no known instances of Americans boycotting U.S. allies besides Israel. So let's not pretend like they don't know exactly who this is aimed at. I didn't even know that, actually. And the idea that, I mean, I almost find that hard to believe that we can argue that there's no, I would argue what they're saying is a institutionalized, like through a major organization. But the point is that Israel is the focal point of people protesting for obvious reasons. It says, moreover, over the weekend, the Libertarian Platform, the Mises Caucus, wrote on Twitter that anti-BDS laws restricting boycotts of Israel have long been an affront to free association and free speech. So as it stands, that's an unconstitutional reality that we live in. H.R. 8767 is a direct violation of the First Amendment, not the new amendment, that too, but as it stands already on the books. This will grow American opposition to Israel faster, leading to more desperate regime crackdowns, and so on. Now, you could argue that from Israel's perspective, that is the design to point at all of that as why we need more of this stuff, because you're all disgusting and racist, as they literally murder people based on their race. Now, to get to actually, before we get to the point is, I want to talk about, that's right. I forgot I included these very quickly because I want to get to the conversation. We referenced this from Max Blumenthal earlier, like yesterday's show, and the overarching point of two main articles from Dropsite News and from 404. That goes to the Signal clone that Trump admin used was hacked. That was yesterday. Because that's a development on top of the fact that Mike Waltz was even using that app. So think about the timing of this. To where on the second you get the conversation that Mike Waltz is caught using an Israeli clone Signal app that's basically for relaying all of their internal national security conversations back to Israel. And then 2 days later, we find out they were hacked through the app that they're discussing. Does that not seem like we'll get into what that could be, contrived, or maybe Israel itself, or maybe somebody recognizing the vulnerability that Israel allowed for their own purposes and took advantage. It's insane to me that this is that obvious. But before we get to that, I wanted to reiterate the points we're talking about here, especially since our conversation is the overarching point about Israeli infiltration of politics. And that's not just this current administration. This is just the most obvious I've ever seen it. It goes back a long way. Here again is Professor Ilan Pappé talking about what he knows and has seen in the past, and even cites what Obama said in his own memoir about how Israel controls Congress.
A book coming out which is called Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic, and I show how from 1900 both in America and in Britain, you target politicians wherever they are at the beginning of their career, you commit them to Zionism and later to Israel. And at first, of course, they were not powerful enough to influence enough people, but the more they grew in numbers, they were able to influence more. So when people say, why does Biden so automatically supports Israel, the lobby doesn't need to ring Biden and say to him, you better support Israel.
He knows the rules of the game.
He knows the rules. He knows what happened to anyone who even dared to slightly, like Obama or Carter, slightly challenged what happened to them. You read Obama's memoirs, you can see how he said, I suddenly understood any word I'm saying on Israel can bring down Congress. So I had to be very, very careful. And actually what he says, he admits, I could not be loyal to my basic instinct, which was to be pro-Palestinians. I couldn't, because I wouldn't be a president.
Now, like I said before, I don't know if I believe that, or that's just Obama trying to play all you're really admitting is that you're dishonest, right? That somehow, because if you look at his administration, it's not like he tried to get, ultimately he towed the line like everybody else. So I just don't take that at face value, but it's information that is worth hearing, even if it's opportunism, because that's the point I keep making. That's what we need as individuals to acknowledge, not accept and be okay with, but acknowledge that it exists and use the opportunism of all you smaller politicians out there that want to take advantage of what we can see that they know everybody sees. Doesn't get a lot of influence because they're not the higher ups on the scale, but might recognize they can get more benefit from leaning into the people telling the truth, because we are the people that we need support from, that and whether the juice is worth the squeeze and counterbalance to what Israel will do to them for calling it out. There are enough of them that are willing to do that. And I think right now we have to keep leaning into that. Now, here is another example of how clear this is. Gen X Girl, and you guys have seen this. We referenced it once before. The 4-part series called The Lobby. Exactly what we're talking about. The very clear overlap of how this happens. And it's not just the lobbying groups themselves, it's the billionaire financiers and the tech moguls behind the scenes that are pulling these strings. That is what we're going to get to overlapping with this, with the Andreessen, Karp, Thiel kind of overlap to all this that led people to make this Trump administration what it is right now. First, as she says, I hear the convicted criminal, Adam Milstein, and his Foundation for Defense of Democracy is behind the takedown of Steve Witkoff. This is an undercover investigation that will reveal who this Israeli foreign agent is and what he's doing to destroy America. This is a clip, one of the clips. Oh, just jumped down on me. 4-part series of lobby about the Israeli lobby. I'm only going to play a couple minutes of it. It's a 14-minute clip. The clip focuses on Adam Milstein and the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, which is not what it appears to be. Highly recommend watching. Here's the first part of it. And as she says herself, it will give you a glimpse of the infiltration.
In part one, how anonymous websites smear supporters of the BDS movement.
Use the name of our daughter. They're capable of doing anything.
It's psychological warfare. Drives them crazy.
Not saying partnership, but I think it's not serious.
Our undercover reporter, Tony, is having a coffee with Eric, his boss at the Israel Project. Tony wanted to find out more about Canary Mission.
There's a guy named Adam Milstein who you might want to meet. He's a convicted felon. That's a bad way to describe him. He's a real estate mogul. When I was working with him when I was at APAC, I was literally emailing back and forth with him while he was in jail. But he's loaded. I mean, he's close to $500 million.
Adam Milstein has become a central figure in the lobby.
And just a really quick point, that's peanuts compared to some of what these people have. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars, right? This guy's $500,000, and he is wildly influential. So just think of the kind of influence and ability that kind of wealth and resources gives you today. And then also when you buy a social engineering app or, and it's not just Elon Musk, it's just an obvious example of how it's overwhelmingly obvious the kind of all unfettered access, influence, control that people can have over far too much. And this one is about specifically the lobbies and U.S. politicians.
His foundation funds numerous pro-Israel organizations. He also sits on the boards of AIPAC's National Council, the Israel on Campus Coalition, and Stand With Us. Our reporter filmed him alongside Jacob Boehm from the Israel on Campus Coalition at the Stand With Us conference in Los Angeles. The two men had lengthy private discussions. Milstein is close to probably the wealthiest donor to the pro-Israel lobby, Sheldon Adelson. Adelson's money helped Milstein expand the Israeli-American Council into a major new force within the lobby. Adelson arrived at the 2016 IAC conference with Rudy Giuliani, now an advisor to President Trump.
I remember Adelson passed away. His wife, who's right there next to him, basically took up the reins and is carrying the very same influence. Basic, whatever you want to see it as. To me, it is a lobbying, influential oligarch type of dynamic where they work their way into U.S. politics and whoever else in the world we're talking about. And don't forget, I'll show you the link afterward. Miriam Adelson, his wife, offered Trump $100 million, and it's gone up since then in regard to allowing the annexation of the West Bank and everything else that we know, which is literally happening. That's illegal. There's no question. And here we are. Giuliani, of course, playing his typical role, like the rest of them involved with this, or the Dershowitzes and the rest. They all very clearly are on a side. And they, people that want to pretend like they believe in the law or the Constitution will always show you who they are when it comes to this conversation.
An IAC video from the conference shows Milstein and Adelson discussing their partnership.
You said you see the vision and you tell us, go and do it. And we took your orders and we made it happen. And we took your money.
There's somebody else around that?
Right. We took your orders and we made it happen. Pretty clear.
An IAC video from the conference shows Milstein and Adelson discussing their partnership.
You said you see the vision and you tell us, go and do it. And we took your orders and we made it happen. and we took your money.
There's somebody else around that can give you $50 million?
No, there's no... Sheldon...
Eric is wary of Adelson's relationship with the U.S. president.
He's really impulsive. If he gets a call from, Donald Trump, comes to get all the pro organizations to start helping us. He starts twisting their arms and putting pressure on them.
So Trump said, get all the Israeli organizations to start helping us. Like that, this is tapping into, like, and it's just like with Netanyahu and Gvir and Smotrich, like leaning into the radical parts of everything in order to gain control over the process. Same conversation. It's happening right in, this is old. This is old. This is not a new documentary. So it's amazing how much information can be out there about this stuff, on the record kind of stuff. And they're not hiding these connections, guys. But with every day, we get more information showing you that this is not just a partnership. It's not just a handshake, right? This one of the others controlling something. One of the other, right? In my opinion, it's obvious that Israel is dictating U.S. policy. Plenty argue that it's the other way around, but either way, there is an incestuous relationship that is not in your interest, whether American or Israeli, if you're paying attention.
I give you $1 million. You better start putting out TV ads. That's not our goal. Yeah.
We made it happen.
With the U.S. president.
He's really impulsive. If he gets a call from, Donald Trump, comes to get all the pro organizations to start helping us. He starts twisting their arms and putting pressure on them. I give you $1 million. You better start putting out TV ads.
Wow.
That's not our goal. It's not our mission.
Tony attended the Israeli-American Council's annual conference. At a party, he spotted the IAC's chairman, Adam Milstein.
It's very important that we're proud Jews. We're not, I was born Jews, but I'm really not Jew, and I'm not sure I'm proud Jew. We're proud about our history. We have strong connection to the land of Israel. So this Israeli identity is now all over the world. I'm Tony. I'm in the Israel.
So this is all now all over the world. Now, this is the point. There's an interconnected dynamic that they've created through the Zionist Israeli culture that people around the world, whether connected to Israel or not, right? That's Judaism is a religion. That's it. But whether connected to Israel or not, the idea becomes that they need to have this idea that they're part of the same ecosystem and fight for the same things. Now, that's not to say everybody who has that mindset is doing it for nefarious reasons, but understand that. And there's a lot of people from these groups, from the IDF who've left, or Israelis, or people that have spoken out over the years, or former CIA or Mossad, who tell you that that's what this agenda is and how they use the racist idea, the anti-Semitism idea to trap people into people scared from criticism. That's never a way to say that doesn't exist. People are racist out there, clearly. But it's to show how well they use this stuff. And they built this. Right. And that's the conversation about the dual nationality point, which should apply to literally any dual nationality, not Jewish, but Israeli citizenship and American citizenship, or Chinese citizenship and American citizenship at the same point, no matter where you are. I just want you to continue to hear how they've built this out. And what you're seeing here is how he is a central linchpin to the funding lobby dynamic, even through the defensive democracy point, which is not, seen as being a part of that.
With Harry Gallagher.
Milstein told Tony how critics of Israel should be handled.
First of all, investigate who they are. What's their agenda? They're picking on the Jews because it's easy, because it's popular. We need to expose what they really are.
Now, see, what this is an Israeli. Remember, he has Israeli citizenship. Israeli leading financed efforts that overlap with Israeli oligarchs to go after Americans speaking about things they don't like. And realize what they're saying is, they know because you say Palestine should be free that somehow you hate Jewish people. And whether he believes that or not, it guides the direction they go after people who are speaking in way, whether you say things about Jews or not. You have a right to say whatever you want in this country. The bottom line is they're using funding to go after Americans for ideas. This has been going on forever. It's just now, for the first time in a very long time, gaining enough traction for people to be aware of how nefarious this is. Now, let's be clear. Even if it was literally about just people speaking about Jews, it would still be unconstitutional. It would still be illegal, in my opinion, or even just, nefarious, alarming for an Israeli entity to go after Americans for speech. But again, let's be very clear that as we keep proving, the majority of what they point at when they do that is people talking about Palestine, or even just anti-Israel in the concept of human rights or illegal government actions. It's very clear.
And we need to expose the fact that they're anti everything we believe in. And we need to put them on the run. Right now,
on the run.
They like terrorize us, and we are...
How do we put them on the run, though?
doing it by exposing who they are, what they are, the fact that they're racist, the fact that they're bigot, that they're dying in democracy.
Okay, and whether that's the truth or not, that's how the framing will go. That's the point. These are people out there saying Palestine should not be subjected to, whatever that you hate the Jew, you are a bigot, and anti-democrat, or anti-democracy. We've heard all these. We've heard this repetition. So there's a built, controlled narrative about anybody standing against their agenda. That's what he's talking about.
Do you think there's a good role to just naming them as anti-Semites?
Not just anti-Semites, it's too simple.
Right, because anti-Semitism accusations have lost their influence because of how they apply it to literally anybody talking about Israel. And that's the reality. So what they've done is effectively hidden the actual anti-Semites or racists out there by using the term to go after anybody who calls out what they're doing, which is illegal. Israeli government crimes. What he's going to say is that we should turn it into something else, which is, again, what we keep hearing today. Listen to what he says next.
We need to present them for what they really are. They're anti-freedom, they're anti-Christian.
Anti-Christian, anti-freedom.
Anti-democracy. That's what we need to do.
Wow.
Numerous groups from the pro-Israel lobby were attending the conference. An Israeli official gave them a message to pass on to BDS supporters in America.
Everybody out there who has to do anything with BDS should ask himself twice, do I want to be on this side or do I want to be on the other side? If I'm submitting to BDS, what would be the effect? We've got the budget. We can bring things to the table that are quite different.
In episode 1 of the Lobby USA, Tony discovered that the Israeli government has launched a covert campaign to gather information on American citizens.
Yep.
We have...
And that's not new, not even remotely.
3 different sub-campaigns. Data gathering, working on activist organization, money trail.
I remember Greenblatt is the leaked audio where he admits they have spies inside of Jewish organizations in the country that talk about how Israel's committing crimes. An Israeli government entity spying on Americans. It's all over the place.
The Israeli official named one organization that was a partner in its covert campaign, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, or FDD.
This is something that only a country with its resources can do the best.
Right. That's why they've decided to infiltrate countries and use that in the same effort.
We have FDD. We have others working on this.
She names the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy as an agent for this foreign government.
This is Ali Abunimov from Electronic Intifada speaking for the podcast.
Going after American citizens. I mean, that quote is a smoking gun.
Sorry, are you Jonathan? Hey, I'm Tony. Hi. Hi. I met up with Benny Wine.
Jonathan Shanza works...
Very interested in getting diabetes.
Covert operations or Iranian or even Canadian official saying that they were running covert operations to spy on Americans and using an organization like the Foundation for Defense of Democracies as a front group. I think it would be a bombshell.
Well, obviously. I mean, this is what's crazy. And it's funny that even has to be pointed out, but he's right to make the point because so many people make the art think about it. If it was any other entity anywhere saying that they were using a front group essentially to spy on you for a foreign government, that would be monumental. It's almost like a schizophrenic thing that we can't acknowledge how important that is just because it's Israel. I mean, it really does show you how long this effort has been going on. Now, I think generally right there is where I wanted to stop. There's a lot more that you could watch. There was one other part I was going to try to play, but for time, I'm going to. Oh, I think that was it right there. For time, I'm going to maybe play one more part right here, and then we'll jump ahead.
For the defense of Israel.
Middle Eastern Studies field, academics have failed, and that's why people like me are considered useful, at least to some.
To call it the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is a misnomer. It's the Foundation for the Defense of Israel. When you strip away all the layers of the onion and you look at what you really have, what you have is a foundation that is dedicated to one goal, and that is defending Israel at every turn.
The FDD's mission has been to associate students who support BDS through links to charities and pressure groups, ultimately to Hamas, which governs the besieged territory of Gaza.
And that's the ultimate effort of just making subjective connections. And, the bottom line is, regardless of whether you can draw a connection from somebody to something, it does not then invalidate the entire argument from the group. Right. And on top of that, what it tends to be are subjective connections. And on top of that, you can recognize how there are people out there who believe, and maybe you think they're wrong, maybe they are, that Hamas is ultimately an entity just simply fighting back against Israeli oppression. Now, let's, of course, acknowledge that there's funding that goes through Qatar and others that from Israel to Hamas. And that has to flavor how you see that. It does not in any way invalidate the legal act of armed resistance, no matter what group it was fighting back from inside of Gaza against the occupation of Israel. That's the legal reality, the Fort Geneva Convention. They have an armed resistance. They have a right to armed resistance if they're occupied, whether or not they were attacked first. So that all of this is just about framing this as people resisting what they want as terrorists. Very George Bush of them, right? It's a very exactly, or just U.S. government, how this tends to work. Make sure you watch the rest of it. That's only part of part one. It's well done. Now, again, here's the article from before. Trump is desperate for Miriam Adelson's cash. Her condition, West Bank annexation. Yet again, Haaretz showing you what our government pretends isn't existing, or our entire media apparatus. Now, here is a clip of this. This was specifically Dan Caldwell, who is the kind of the one ostracized from the Trump administration, speaking with Tucker Carlson about this exact conversation. And so just what I think it shows you is one more example, as Gen X girl's pointing out, of how anybody who decides to not toe the line on the blind ignorance and blind act, letting Israel do whatever it wants, the moment they call out one of these unconstitutional acts, or that maybe what Israel's doing is not America first, they get kicked out. Now that either needs to show you that that's not an America first administration, or somebody else is driving the bus, or both.
People want war with Iran. I think when it comes down to it, is a lot of people still think you can do regime change wars successfully in the Middle East.
Regime change wars? I thought this was all about getting rid of the whatever half dozen Iranian nuclear sites because we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, I think Donald Trump has exposed them.
It's hard to tell whether he's trying to be facetious or not, but that's how he plays his shtick, But at the end of the day, it's important to hear it because truth does come out on the show. I just, my opinion about how this tends to play. You don't platform people. It doesn't matter, but I don't trust the intentions coming from this platform. But either way, the fact that he had him on is still a good thing. And what he's talking about does highlight the problem. So maybe I'm wrong, consider that.
Because they're essentially, some of the biggest advocates of war with Iran, whether it's groups like Foundation for Defense of Democracy, writers at certain publications, essentially they are saying the problem with diplomacy is it doesn't lead to regime change.
Right.
Is that the policy should be regime change. It's almost like the nuclear issue is really about creating a pathway to regime change. And it really still goes back to this idea is a lot of them deep down inside believe, and some of them say it out loud, that we could have made Iraq successful. And Iraq is just a mess. It is an absolute just cluster.
So bottom line, and it goes on, is the point that this is somebody who is trying to say, at the very least, that this is not, we're being led down the wrong path. And those are the people that get pushed away. Here is AIPAC Tracker sharing the same clip that we just played and just kind of a free shot of that for the podcast. It's the same guy with all the different connections to Defense of Democracy and AIPAC and all the rest of the Israeli influence apparatus. Here's Adam Milstein is his name. Here's a tweet from him saying, deportation more than justified. See, the point is these people are all interconnected with this deportation campaign, and it is being driven by Israel in a lot of ways, if not entirely. And what's most incredible about this, is that I was saying whether the weaponized migration or the different points we've made over the years of how that's an Israeli agenda, and now we're literally watching it play out in front of us and people still can't connect these dots. These kinds of people should not be welcome in America, he says. This is Motion Madawi, which we've discussed. I'm trying to remember exactly the dynamic. He says, whose deportation has been covered sympathetically, was reported to the FBI in 2015 for bragging to a gun shop owner about killing Jews and stating how he loved to kill Jews. It's first of all, saying something like that is not justifiable reason to deport somebody, even if that's actually the reality. Though it's insane that they're using subjective claims or speech. Now, look, I'm not defending the gross sentiments of people that are racist. The point is, you're allowed to say what you want. The idea that you can't, it's crazy to me. If that's a crime, charge them with a crime. You're arguing people should be deported because of ideological things, whether you think they're absolutely wrong or not. And I agree probably on some of the things we're talking about, but it's the same as always with free speech or anything else. If you do not defend the worst of speech, you do not believe in free speech. These people are destroying this country from within. Of course, Stephen Miller says, in the Trump administration, sovereignty will always win. Little Zionist Miller, clearly, I said, as we can tell by all the clips below. But whose sovereignty are you fighting for? And this is Donald Trump in the same thread, literally showing you that he will censor you for Israel, that he will deport people who say things about Israel, which we're now watching take place. But yeah, with sovereignty will always win. Yeah, ask Iraq how's this worked out. Ask Syria how that's worked out. Ask any of the countries that you claim, but no, sovereignty will only win when you control everything, and that's your sovereignty. I mean, it's just so, it's insulting to your intelligence that people like this Stephen Miller, who act like they're on your side, who are clearly working against this country, act like what they say, they can come out and say something that is diametric opposite, which is what he does. We won that Supreme Court case. No, you didn't, bud. And everyone knows that. Now, it's like I said before. Oh, I think I have another comment right here. Oh, I guess I didn't share it. Either way, the point is, I don't know what scares me more. Whether this guy doesn't know he's wrong in some of these cases or doesn't care. It's just obvious this person is working against your interests. Now, here is Senator Rand Paul, saying that, and this is kind of an extension of the same conversation. This is about the definition of anti-Semitism, but it's the same conversation. And Glenn Greenwald says, Rand Paul denounces the attempt to radically expand what anti-Semitism means. The IHRA model, which criminalizes common criticism of Israel. Congress is poised to enact that definition into law, and Trump is forcing colleges to implement it. So let's not pretend like this is some pushback. The Trump administration, again, 2018 bill around the boycott to begin with was his last administration, are absolutely all about this. He says, because Paul actually supports free speech, here's what he said.
The amendment isn't about protecting good speech. It protects even the most despicable and vile speech. Brandenburg was a Nazi and an anti-Semite, and he said horrible things. And the First Amendment, the Constitution, the Supreme Court ruled that you can say terrible things. That's unique about our country. In Europe, you can't say anything. In Europe, you can, if you call a boy that thinks he's a girl a boy, you can go to jail for that.
Which is insane to me that you have people like Musk and Trump who constantly call those things out in Europe and then try to do the same things here. Probably just distraction. Who knows?
If you say something about the Holocaust in Europe, you can go to jail. This is what we're doing. We're codifying what Europe did to speech. It's a terrible idea. But everything in the 11 examples is protected by Brandenburg, without question. And so when you say, oh yeah, we're going to do all these, and we're still going to have all these examples of things you can't do, like stereotypical allegations. Have you guys ever listened to comedy? Do you know why Jerry Seinfeld won't go to colleges? Because he can't make any Jew jokes anymore.
Of course, he's advocating for you to be censored and deported right now if you have any of these ideas, or I shouldn't say deported. I haven't seen him, probably. I'm kind of being facetious, but very actively supports Israel and the ongoing genocide, as we've seen many times by now, and does call for censorship around that conversation. So it's worth pointing that out. He just probably used him to make a point in all of this. It's about people who make jokes about these things, and he gives you one right here. And, it's insane, again, that we can't recognize. It's like, okay, by the way, I didn't mention at the beginning, Texas is trying to pass an anti-meme law right now, or saying that under 18 people can't even have social media accounts. That's all in Texas right now. Those are all the same conversation. I think very clearly being driven by the Zionist agenda, as even Greenblatt made clear to say, it's a generational problem. We need to go after the younger idea, and here we are. And so my point is that I think that the fact that all this is about ideas, or in this case, comedy, it's one more angle of the same agenda all creeping in around us. Sure as hell was in America first.
You know, the thing is, or Indian jokes, or whatever jokes. Jokes are about silly categorizations of people, of saying all people do things. One of my favorites I just saw this morning was from Jon Stewart. If the Jews control the media, why don't we give ourselves better press? Is that going to be controlled? Yeah, and I'm not that funny. I just stole that from Jon Stewart. But the thing is that going to be controlled? Will Jon Stewart be allowed to say that on a college campus? Are we going to send the Title VI police after him? I mean, this is just ridiculous and terrible. We all condemn anti-Semitism. We all just, are against bigotry. And yet this is a step backwards.
Now, of course, if it was Jon Stewart or Jerry Seinfeld, they wouldn't care because it's hypocrisy, guys. And we've seen that already. So it shows you it's about chilling political speech, when and how they want to. That's what this is all about. Now, there's another tweet from Gen X Girl simply showing you that it's not just Mike Lauer and the anti-boycott bill. It's actually also, which is pretty much everybody in his cabinet, but it's also Michael Waltz, who, by the way, about 250,000 rounding up, coming from Israeli lobbies. Mossad Mike's exposed, she says. Terrible couple of weeks for the Israel lobby. Mike Lauer's Israel bills neutralized for now, again, even though it's already in reality on the books for Americans as it needs to be in their minds, right? It shows your ability to boycott them. The new edition was just about trying to stop you from working with international entities just to call it out. And thanks to American activism and 11 First Amendment senators, she goes on to say, Mike Waltz removed from the National Security Council and exposed as an Israeli spy. Now, let's be clear. If you don't understand by now that what you're seeing him get exposed for is what literally all of them are involved in, so if you're going to call him a spy, then damn well better recognize the entirety of the U.S., or let's just say the current administration and the cabinet, rather, is the same thing. But my opinion, I think the U.S. government is what we're talking about here. But he goes, now he needs to be rejected as the UN ambassador. So realize that, guys. This guy gets exposed for this. And he gets moved over to being the ambassador to Israel, to the United Nations. I mean, that's perfect, isn't it? I mean, that just shows you that there's something going on there. Why wouldn't you get rid of him if that's the point? That shows you that some level of the administration, the decision-making, whoever's doing that, they recognize they just needed to put him to the side. They can't get rid of him, though, because that's what Israel wants. They want him inside this discussion. But overall, it's all over the place. I mean, she links some of the other things we've already talked about. Well, let's go over this conversation. Oh, and then not forget that Marco Rubio, who before the administration was, oh, that'll never happen. Everyone told me, no, he's such a rhino. Nobody likes him. And then they pick him and he's a savior of the right now. And he's now basically the new Kissinger in regard to both positions. That's insane to me. And this guy is not on your side. But as we said before, former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who is now ambassador to Israel, the United Nations, was caught using the telemessage Israeli intelligence-linked app that was sending back archives to a server which is controlled by Israel. And it says an Israeli modified version of Signal with archiving features. And then just to show you this image they share, which I think is relevant to the boycott point, and I'll show you this directly from, this is a real point, is the conversation. This is the one on Newsweek. All the differences is, I think, one state's difference to the map we're going to show you. And what it shows you is the pink and red are all places where you're not allowed to boycott Israel to certain, and what it shows you is either past legislation or executive order, which apparently to our government there's no difference, even though there really is. I don't know why that's not, there it goes. So that's just showing you that on Newsweek. Here's an image that's been going around. I think the only difference is it shows India on here as being one of those, but the rest is the same. If your state is purple, it has a law, whether executive order or past legislation, that makes it illegal for you to receive a public contract if you boycott Israel. That's as of November 2020. Just take a look. For the podcast, it is, I think, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and maybe 12 more, 12 states out of the entire country. You're not allowed to boycott Israel. Otherwise, you will get, potential legal repercussions, or not allowed to have contracts or businesses. This is supposed to be free speech, or, any number of constitutional rights, because there's many different overlaps you could have in there. This shows you exactly what we're all trying to highlight, guys. It's been going on a long time. This Newsweek article is from April 2024. So you can argue that these might have shifted a bit. That's why maybe Indiana's no longer like that. But it's very clear what's going on. So let's get into that very infiltration. And over the last 76 years, how the infiltration has taken place right in front of us. Now, we just referenced this tweet the last show. Max Blumenthal with it. It's a minute-and-a-half leaked conversation from the CEO of AIPAC. He says more confirmation of what AIPAC's director said in audio he obtained from a private session. Mike Waltz was groomed by the Israeli lobby to serve as an asset in the GOP White House. This stuff is literally everywhere. Now, if you have people that are on the defending Trump's side of this who want to pretend this doesn't matter or it's not real, recognize who they are and recognize they are not on your side, or they're uninformed or disinformed, misinformed, whatever you want to call it, because you're being lied to. If they're telling you this is not a problem, you're being lied to. Ali Abunimah, Electronic Intifada. The firing of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz appears to be part of a battle between the ultra pro-Israel and the ultra pro-Israel wings of the Donald Trump administration. Now, that's the most accurate framing I've seen. I actually don't think this comes down to whether they wanted war with Iran or not, because as I'll show you in a second, they all want war with Iran. It's, I think, about what got exposed too much, and is what people like me are highlighting is reaching more and more people because of stuff like this. Now, here's some of the captions from the article he's highlighting. The title is Waltz angered Trump over conversation with Israel, which, whether that's the case or not, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe Trump is being managed to the point where he didn't know that kind of infiltration was there. I find that hard to believe. You can decide. It says, but Waltz also upset Trump after an Oval Office visit in early February by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when the National Security Advisor appeared to share the Israeli leader's conviction that the time was ripe to strike Iran. But Trump said the same thing. So did J.D. Vance. So did a lot of people. And their recent comments make the case that they're going to do something if Iran doesn't do what they're told. Now it says, of military action, and was operating hand in glove with the Israelis. That's, I'll read the whole thing. The view by some of the administration was that Waltz was trying to tip the scales in favor of military action and was operating hand in glove with the Israelis. That's the Washington Post. Not to say that means it's real, but think of the level of this conversation, guys. It says, if Jim Baker was doing a side deal with the Saudis to subvert George Bush, you'd be fired, a Trump advisor said, referring to Bush's Secretary of State. Quote, you can't do that. You work for the president of your country, not a president of another country. Now, this very well could be a way to make it seem like they're outraged, which suggests that that's not the rest of the administration. That's how these things tend to go. When I think we can quite literally prove that, if not all, some of them very clearly are tapped into the same. Hegseth, for example, clearly. So maybe this is about trying to pretend to you that they got rid of the problem. A release valve is what that's called. You know, the steam's building. And they know you're about to explode with this, but they go, okay, well, here it is, and we got him. Letting a little steam out. Oh, okay, well, it's over now. Let's move on to the next conversation. That's how this tends to work, in my opinion. Here, Ryan Grimm, citing for Drop Site News, Mike Waltz was not caught using Signal yesterday. That was the original point. But rather, and because the whole thing was the Signal gate. Oh, here he is using Signal yet again. Nope, it turns out, as you now know, it was the Israeli tech firm's version of that makes a copy of all of its messages. That opens up messages to surveillance by foreign intelligence. Exactly by design. So here is the article from Drop Site News. On the day he was fired as National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz used an Israeli app to archive Signal messages. It says, during Wednesday's meeting for Trump's cabinet, and this was written on May 2nd. During his meeting, Mike Waltz checked the app on his phone. That's the image that you've seen going around, the one on the main show today, using what appears to be Signal. As news broke that Waltz had lost his job as National Security Advisor, images from the cabinet meeting circulated widely online on Thursday. So the timing is interesting, right? So something was already going on. Clearly, he was being shuffled to the side, and then this came out. So maybe this is an effort by somebody to kind of dictate the way this conversation goes. And again, you know who's infiltrated. It's the obvious word, but you know who is manipulating all of this through obvious channels. Now, that's not to say that the way this went, or the hack we'll talk about next, was definitely Israel. There's other points you could make about why it was still, and it would still add up to me, but it's one of the obvious possibilities. Because right now, I think it's obvious to people that are simply objective and paying attention, the entire world is becoming uncomfortably aware with what Zionism has always been and what Israel's doing to the world right now. And so what a lot of this is trying to cultivate some shift of the conversation. And it says, as news broke, he lost his job. Images from the cabinet meeting circulated. Upon closer inspection of the photos, it turns out that Waltz was not using Signal. He appeared to be using an archiving app made by Israeli firm Telemessage, which sells companion apps meant to enable archiving messages. In one of the Reuters photos of Waltz's phone, a pop-up appears with the text, verify your TM-SGNL PIN. Just below a message from, that's Telemessage Signal, just below a message from J.D. Vance. TM-SGNL is an aspect of the Telemessage's software called Signal Capture, literally called Signal Capture, that it sells to governments and corporations to enable archiving. Of course, carefully categorized and kept safe by Israel and their servers. Walt's misuse of the Signal app became one of the Trump administration's biggest scandals when it was revealed that he accidentally added the editor of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, to a group chat with top officials. I still don't believe that was some kind of accident. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had laid out details on a forthcoming bombing mission targeting Yemen in the next thread. The whole thing felt very contrived. And remember, and this is where some of the information was revealed that Israel was involved in that. And it says, aside from cybersecurity and espionage concerns, the incident raised the issue of federal record-keeping laws after screenshots revealed that the conversations were not on auto erase. The White House indicated that there would be efforts to remedy the situation. Now, Signal is apparently widely used by government officials. But what's interesting is that obviously, the way we've seen this in the past, or whether it's Signal or anything, or even well before that, or Clinton with documents, or Biden with documents, or Trump and his family with documents. And it's this, all of these people do not follow what we believe they're supposed to. The laws are for you. What they do is whatever they want. And sometimes people get, tokens get pointed out to make it seem like they're holding people accountable. They self-enforce when somebody gets too loud, like a mafia. That's how I see this. Either way, I think it's frustrating that we act like they care about this kind of stuff. Now, there's some level of wanting to be secret for their own purposes, but at the end of the day, it's obvious they don't seem to care about Israel if this is what's happening. And it's not just Waltz, is what I'm going to get to. It appears that the State Department, well before Trump's administration, have been using this, or CDC, HHS. So somebody knows this, guys, and they're not worried about it, or they're not able to say anything about it. The personal smartphones of U.S. national security officials are liable to be prime targets of spyware by foreign adversaries, including U.S. allies. When the revelations of widespread Signal usage were first published, many speculated about the endpoint security of senior Trump officials' smartphones, meaning where is this data going? Where does this end up? Where, if you got the archive, where does that end up? Is it some server in Israel is the point. Israel's tech world is small, and Israel leads the world in exports of spyware and digital forensic tools. As Derek has been aptly covering, former Israel Defense Forces intelligence officials have gone on to found tech companies, especially in the field of spyware and surveillance. Companies like NSO Group, maker of the controversial Pegasus software, were founded and staffed by Israeli officials. And you know this story. The Israeli spy group that was found liable for hacking WhatsApp users. A criminal organization, as far as I can tell. And then, as Derek already wrote, meet the spyware companies preparing to unleash their new tech during Trump's second administration. Boom, here we are. Derek, yet again, ahead of the curve. It's just transparent what's happening. These groups are criminal. Like they were caught spying, caught using what they claim they weren't allowed to, or infiltrating different groups. And here we are. And Trump even said at the beginning that he was going to allow the NSO Group and these different software entities to work, to be allowed to be used. Here we are, where what we're finding out is that the overlap to this is, well, in regard to I'm jumping ahead because it's the next paragraph, but there is an overlap to Pegasus NSO Group, to this very conversation, to this very company. So if we already know, as a matter of fact, that this has been a California court recently ruled against the NSO Group that has become infamous for hacking encrypted platforms. They were found guilty. It's not new. There's plenty of people around the world that have called this group out. Now, it goes on to say, companies like NSO Group, maker of the controversial Pegasus software, were founded and staffed by Israeli officials. The company was sanctioned by the Biden administration. Because, again, showing you the nonpartisan, all of U.S. government dynamic. Israeli spyware firms have become known for selling their products to oppressive regimes around the world, where the tech is often used to target human rights advocates, journalists, dissidents. That was the main point about the NSO Group. Telemessage was founded in 1999. The same year its founder left the Israeli military intelligence job. Surprise, surprise. The company found early success in the burgeoning world of text message technology. The company grew, eventually pivoted to focusing on extracting messages for common communication platforms for the purposes of archiving. Of course, only that apparently, often to meet record-keeping regulations. Of course. Or not at all. And it goes on to say, tech professionals have moved between companies like Telemessage and some of the leading Israeli spyware firms. For example, Alan Falai, technical support manager at Telemessage until 2021, left the company to join the NSO Group. According to his LinkedIn profile, another employee is Zach Demoza, joined Telemessage last year after a stint at Cellbrite, maker of the hardware and software widely used by law enforcement to extract data from smartphones. Total, no, nothing to see there. Don't mind the man behind the curtain. Literally a guy whose job was to extract data from your smartphone, but now we're just starting a company to help you archive. No big deal. The Telemessage's founder and top employees likewise share Israeli military intelligence backgrounds, like literally every other company that we're talking about in this conversation. Guy Leavitt, interesting last name, Telemessage's CEO, quote, serves as the head of the planning and development of one of the IDF's intelligence elite technical units from 1996 until 1999, according to his biography. That is the CEO of this company, of Telemessage, that Waltz was allowing to archive his phone. And who seems like most of the government, what appears to be the depth of this. Gil Shapira, Telemessage's vice president business development, served in the Israeli Air Force until 1999 as a computer programmer, project manager, and team leader. Nir Ephraim, the vice president of corporate strategy. All this is all Telemessage. Served 4 years in the elite military. Can you guess which unit? Can you guess? Unit 8200, Israeli Defense Forces. According to his bio, where he commanded teams of computer experts. A mobile researcher at Telemessage, Aviv Tzitayat, how do you say that? Tzitayat, worked for Israeli military intelligence as recently as February 2021. You know, the old thing, there is no former intelligence guy. I mean, it's at least worth your consideration. He says there he worked as a reverse engineer and software developer. Because that makes sense for an archiving platform, reverse engineering. Come on, this is a clear operation. In my opinion, please look into it. Another employee, Mayor Ben Abu, previously served with Unit 8200, a group within Israeli military intelligence specializing in clandestine operations, signal intelligence, and counterintelligence. The unit has been compared to the National Security Agency, and its graduates frequently go on to work in the cyber warfare industry. Now, again, I might as well grab it again, just because in case you haven't seen it, I'll come back to this. It really does bring it all together when you read that paragraph. I mean, and that comes from an Israeli article about what they're doing. I'll read it in a second. The point is, that is the reality, that they gravitate into the open field as if they're moving on from intelligence, and they continue the intelligence operation. Israel has a long history of espionage and surveillance in the United States. In 1998, it was identified by the U.S. National Counterintelligence Center to be on the Department of Energy's sensitive country list, an ally, apparently. In a 2000 report, the NCIC listed Israel as one of the, quote, most active collectors of intelligence against the private sector. Despite the close relationship between the U.S. and Israel, the Associated Press reported that the CIA's Near East Division considered Israel the number one counterintelligence threat in 2012. In 2019, the U.S. government determined that Israel had most likely planted Stingray surveillance devices that mimic cell phone towers around the White House, intending to spy on President Trump and his top aides, according to Political Report. Israel denied the allegations. Nobody seemed to care about that during Trump's last administration. A review of federal contracting data shows Telemessage has a history of contracting with the Department of State, Health and Human Services. The company acknowledges its work with the federal government on its website. When reached for comment, a representative would not confirm or deny the White House had purchased licenses for their apps. What? But acknowledge they sell technology to U.S., local, and federal government agencies. Wouldn't confirm or deny that you have an app for them to archive information? Like, that is, how do you not see what this is? Absolutely important and very, 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 this is what infiltration looks like. Now, before we go forward, yet again, here's an article that Whitney wrote for TLAV, and I want to read you the one paragraph that is important to hear. I believe it was right here. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Hold on. Dang it. How do every time I can't find this. Yeah, there it is. So it says that same article, and I'll even include the article for you if you want to read the article itself. Israeli blurs the line between defense apparatus and local cybersecurity hub. That this paragraph is right in this article. Here's what it says. Well, first off, she's setting it up, says that the article, it contains a stunning revelation that many Israeli companies, including Black Cube, right, remember the one that was hired by Weinstein to basically surveil and threaten his victims. They're all former Mossad or informer Mossad, have been founded as fronts for intelligence operations since 2012. It states that, quote, since 2012, cyber-related intelligence projects that were previously carried out in-house in the Israeli military and Israel's main intelligence arms are transferred to companies that in some cases were built for this exact purpose. The article then adds, in some cases, managers of development projects in the Israeli military and intelligence arms were encouraged to form their own companies, which then took over the military and or intelligence project. Very, very clear. NSO Group, now here is just asking, just Brave. Give me the telemessage unit 8200 connections. Here's what even Brave says. Telemessage, an Israeli firm that provides secure messaging solutions for enterprises, has a connection to Unit 8200, Israel's cyber spy agency. The company was founded by a former Israeli military intelligence official who was a leader in one of IDF's intelligence unit, technical units, and many of the telemessage executives and top employees have backgrounds with Israeli military intelligence. The connection between telemessage and Unit 8200 is significant because it raises concerns about the security and privacy of messages archived using telemessage services, especially when used by high-level government officials. Furthermore, some telemessage employees have moved between the company and leading Israeli spyware firms like Cellbrite, which is used by police in the United States to crack down on Americans. That's as often left-wing activists. In this case, we're talking about today in regard to how it's being aimed. Personally, I don't think it's about left and right. I think it's about whatever Israel wants to happen. Now, here's a clip we played yesterday that's worth hearing again. Former CIA agent, in quotes, as always, former John Kirikow, tells you what we all should know by now. He said this in many different interviews going back a long way. He even talks about in one discussion how when he was in Israel for a moment, when he was there as one of the agents, that ultimately, or he has his stories, but then also relays stories of other people he knew were there, where the Israeli government, even though they're U.S. supposedly allies who are there in their country, will still mess with them to the point of stealing from them. In one case, they said he came back and they found the dog's tail had been cut off and wrapped in gauze and laid out for them. That's his story. That's from the Israeli government acting to its own allies. Think about that. This is the reality of what the Israeli government is doing throughout this country, and this goes back a long way. Now, bear in mind what we just read with what he's about to say here. Well, something's clearly going on. Let me know if you can hear me still. It's very strange what's going on with this platform right now. All day, there's been some weird things happening. Let me see if I can grab it again. There we go.
The host of CIA Declassified on UNI FYD TV. You said this: we saw what the Israelis were getting away with in these prisons that they had in the West Bank and in Gaza. Nobody raised any objection at all. So we thought, well, if the Israelis can do it, we can do it. The president said we could, and the Justice Department said we could, and so we did. You've also separately described Mossad, saying that it has a negative, disproportionate, and widespread influence on the U.S. national security state. So you're clearly not a fan of the Mossad. Why?
I remember when I first joined the CIA, and this is going back 35 years, there was a declared Mossad officer in the Israeli embassy and a declared Shin Bet officer, and the FBI was able to identify 187 additional Israeli intelligence officers at work in the United States clandestinely. I would say, why? Why would they steal secrets when we give them 99% of everything that we already have?
But doesn't the United States steal secrets from Israel too? Of course they do.
No, actually, no. The Israelis were off limits to us at the CIA. We were not permitted to conduct offensive operations.
I don't believe that for 1 second.
Well, Jeff Stein, the great intelligence beat reporter from Newsweek, would report every year on an intelligence report that the FBI would put out about the worst counterintelligence threats in the United States. And it was Russia, China, and Israel. Eventually, what happened was it caused such a scandal after time of this coming out that Dianne Feinstein ended up changing the rules so that they didn't have to issue the report anymore, so that Jeff Stein wouldn't be able to report on it anymore. But they were alleged by the FBI counterintelligence division to be the most damaging spies in America, only after our supposed adversaries, Russia and China.
Well, some of that you just heard from that report. But, you know, this is from a CIA agent telling you that they are aware of 186 undeclared Israeli Mossad agents roaming around. Now, that's not even talking about like the supposedly no longer parts of these. Like they're no longer part of the intelligence, an open carbine company that runs 911 call centers in the United States, or medical infrastructure, or, you know, everything that we've clearly shown you on the show and Whitney's been showing you for quite a long time. Here is what Daniel McAdams said about the post from AF Post around Mike Waltz, saying that he's using this Signal app. He said, dude is a straight up foreign agent. Now, I have a lot of respect for Daniel McAdams. He's a very intelligent and very objective person. And so it's just important to see when, how much this conversation has shifted to where at some point people, even if they thought that, were afraid to say it because they would be called racist, and it's still happening. The reality is this has nothing to do with what we're talking about with race. This has to do, other than that's how that side is playing it against everybody else. This is about the Israeli government infiltrating other governments and conducting and dictating policy and committing genocide. And when you have a person like this caught literally working on behalf of the Israeli government with an Israeli app that allows them, it's how much more do we need? Here's what WikiLeaks said today. And this now is citing the 404 article that updates this to the hack. The Israeli company behind the modified Signal app used by the Trump administration has been hacked. Telemessage's back-end panel was accessed using credentials found in intercepted data. The hacker, now see, you could argue this is Israel, seeing as how they have all that information, or it could be somebody that took advantage of the middle ground between it. It's hard to say. So it's worth considering who benefits from this, as always. Using credentials found in intercepted data, the hacker exposed archived messages and contact info for U.S. officials. Now, again, one of the earliest points is whether or not this was Israel, or if this was just somebody take advantage of it. It's why this should not be the case. Or why from the very beginning, Trump and Elon and all the rest have used things off the beaten path in their own private servers and their own computers. And every time so far, we've seen those things shown to be vulnerable. Now, is that by design for this kind of dynamic? I don't know. But clearly, it shouldn't be okay that what they're doing is allowing this stuff to be used, maybe for, just a problem reaction solution kind of thing, to get us to freak out, so they build in the new thing they need. That's how this tends to go right now. But it says the hack reveals that archived chat logs are not end-to-end encrypted between the modified messaging app and the final archive destination controlled by telemessage customer, Israel. Commenting on the Israeli, or the way I said that, the point is they're saying between the person who's using it, right? But the point is the middle dynamic in that is the Israeli intelligence apparatus. Commenting on Israeli modification of Signal adopted by U.S. government, Signal app told 404 Media that we cannot guarantee the privacy of these security properties of unofficial versions of Signal, obviously. So here is the article. The Signal clone the Trump admin used was hacked. This was 2 days ago, or yesterday, excuse me. A hacker has breached and stolen customer data from telemessage. Now, think about how much information inside, national security information is flying around on these. And just wait until we get to the next part about oligarchs who are involved in this. And ask yourself how much information could have put, if they're always screaming about national security and pointing at people protesting Israel, national security, and this is okay. Clearly, either they don't care about national security or it's only about one entity. An obscure Israeli company, Telemessage, that sells modified versions of Signal and other messaging apps to the U.S. government to archive messages. 404 Media has learned the data stolen by the hacker contains the contents of some direct messages and group chats sent using the Signal clone, as well as modified versions of WhatsApp, Telegram, WeChat. See, this is infiltration, guys. The telemessage was recently the center of a wave of media coverage after Mike Waltz accidentally revealed that he used the tool in a cabinet meeting with President Trump. The hack, and I think now that alone, just by that, how that got revealed, could be why this person was, or let's be clear, the timing is afterward, but something around this caused this person to be pushed to the side, not removed, but just pushed over to being UN. Or maybe there's some important reason they need a rabid Zionist in regard to the UN and Israel. I don't know. But shouldn't this be something where you're held accountable when you get exposed that you had a massive leak because you're using the wrong thing and all you do is get moved to a new position? There's so many levels to this. It says the hack shows that an app gathering messages of the highest ranking officials in the U.S. government. Walt's chats on the app include recipients that appear to be Marco Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, contain serious vulnerabilities that allowed a hacker to trivially access the archived chats of some people who use the same tool. Now, so think about it. They access the archive chats, which means they're accessing the Israeli Unit 8200 intelligence company's servers. That's the whole point. Now, whether Israel was responsible or not, it shows you that they're the reason this was able to happen. And it says the hacker has not obtained the messages of cabinet members, so we're told anyway, Waltz and people he spoke to, but the hack shows And really, we don't know what they fully have background. We know what they've shown so far, so that may not be true. But it says, but the hack shows that the archived chat logs are not end-to-end encrypted between the modified version, which we already know, and they cite Signal down the article saying that they can't guarantee. Data related to Customs and Border Protection, the cryptocurrency giant Coinbase, and other financial institutions are included in the hacked material, according to screenshots of messages and back-end systems obtained by 404 Media. Now, the interesting overlap with the Customs and Border Patrol, like, we need to see how all this is very clearly interconnected with what's going on and who would desire access to all these ends of this agenda. The breach is hugely significant, not just for those individual customers, but also for the U.S. government more widely. On Thursday, 404 Media was first to report that at the time, U.S. National Security Advisor Waltz accidentally revealed he was using Telemessage's modified version of Signal during the cabinet meeting. On Thursday, it was first reported by them that he did that. The use of that tool raised questions about what classification of information was being discussed across the app and how the data was being secured, and came after revelation, top U.S. officials were using Signal to discuss active combat operations. Now, it turns out that seems to be what is kind of the go-to right now. But nonetheless, there's criticism around that. I mean, I argue that I don't think any apps are actually as secure as they claim, personally. The question is not necessarily about whether they're being secure across the board. I don't think they ever really are. It's about who is benefiting from this and why they're using this app through an Israeli intelligence entity that allows them to archive what they're doing at the highest levels of U.S. power. The hacker did not access all messages stored, they claim, or collected by telemessage, but could have likely accessed more data if they decided to. So all you're doing is saying that's what they're saying. They could be lying about that. Underscoring the extreme risk posed by taking ordinarily secure end-to-end encrypted messaging apps like Signal and adding an extra archive feature to them. Now, this may be in one part trying to convince you that Signal is secure as long as you don't use these other things. I don't think we should trust any of that. Quote, I would say the whole process took about 15 to 20 minutes, said the hacker, which I always think it's so weird how this happens today, describing how they broke into telemessaging system. Quote, it wasn't much effort at all. 404 Media does not know the identity of the hacker, but has verified aspects of the material they have anonymously provided. It goes on to show you how, and they've called and double-checked a lot of this, confirming that it was real information. It says a message sent to the group chat called Upstanding Citizen Brigade, interesting way they frame themselves, included in the hacked data says its source type is Signal, indicating it came from Telemessage's modified version of the messaging app. The message itself was a link to this tweet posted on Sunday, which is a clip of an NBC Meet the Press interview with President Trump about his meme coin. Interesting. That could be relevant. The hacked data includes phone numbers that were part of the group chat. Now, it goes on to point out other examples of how they're basically, it seems like almost using different, like a meme coin video or conversations about, like almost like politically advantageous memes and videos to get them to basically, I would argue possibly people that aren't necessarily already involved with this. Either way, the point is that they're saying that the message itself was linked to the tweet posted about that clip. And it goes on to say, this means a hacker was able to steal what appears to be active, timely discussion about the efforts behind passing a hugely important and controversial cryptocurrency bill. Now, again, whether that is relevant to why it's happening or it's just one example of how they have access to everything, you could decide. One screenshot of the hacker's access to the telemessage panel lists the names, phone numbers, and email addresses of Border Patrol officers. Again, I feel like that's kind of relevant. Another screenshot indicates that the intelligence branch of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police may be using this tool. Now, again, as we get to the bottom, you're going to find out that it seems that they all are. Police, and with Whitney's points, with Carbine and 911 call centers and infrastructure, whether water, medicine, the Israeli government is tapped into these things. That's not a question. With what we can see, that's happening. And this is at the highest levels of power. We need to stop pretending this is not what it looks like. The server that the hacker compromised is hosted by Amazon Cloud Services. Of course it is. And in Northern Virginia. By reviewing the source data of Telemessage's modified Signal app for Android, 404 Media confirmed that the app sends messages data to this endpoint. 404 Media also made an HTTP request to the server to confirm that it is online. So it's an active online point. We know what this is, a Unit 8200 connected Israeli intelligence company. So these things are being sent back to an ongoing server that's run by Israeli intelligence, and saying that the hacker compromised the server that compromised was cloud server, Amazon, which to me ties right into the whole point. Well, I think these tech entities are either compromised themselves or part of the ongoing problem. Now, it says telemessage came to the forefront after a Reuters photograph took a photo in which Waltz was using his mobile phone. Zooming in on the photo revealed that he was using the modified version of Signal made by telemessage. The photograph came around a month after the whole Signalgate point about Houthis being bombed. And it says, as part of that, Waltz accidentally added the editor-in-chief they claim anyway, as we recently said in the other article. Telemessage offers governments and companies a way to archive messages from end-to-end encrypted messaging apps such as Signal, WhatsApp. Telemessage does this by making modified versions of the apps that send copies of the messages to a remote server, which we already said, but in case that wasn't clear. A video from Telemessage posted to YouTube claims that its app keeps, quote, intact the Signal security and end-to-end encryption, which we know that's not true. So they're lying about that. Even Signal says it's not true. Telemessage essentially adds a third party to that conversation by sending copies of those messages somewhere else for storage. A Signal spokesperson, as we said they cannot guarantee that that's happening, the encryption. White House Deputy Press Secretary Anna Kelly previously told NBC News in an email, quote, as we have said many times, Signal is an approved app for government use and is loaded on government phones. Okay, so that should be why then is it acceptable to use an Israeli archive overlap to that, which then opens that possibility, or I think clearly shows that it's no longer encrypted. I mean, if they care about national security or privacy or security, of course this wouldn't be allowed. These are like basic deductive logic points. So why is it being allowed? The answer is hanging there like the most obvious thing in the world. According to public procurement records, Telemessage has contracts with a range of U.S. government agencies, including the State Department, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, HHS, as we already pointed out. Recently, after the wave of media coverage about Waltz's use of the tool, of course, this also, I think, speaks volumes. After it became aware or people started talking about this, Telemessage wiped its website. Now, does that sound like a company who's publicly doing a service, or does that sound like somebody who wants to make sure that nobody does what we're doing right now, or at least has more ability to comb through their connections and show you how obvious this is? They wiped their website? Is that what a business does that wants to, like a normal business would use this to say here, well, I guess you could argue that ultimately this is showing a vulnerability in what they are if you pretend they're not an Israeli company working for Israeli intelligence. But either way, wiping your website would not be the way you handle this if you're in a business trying to grow your business. It just is so obvious what this is. Then it goes on to say, before then, it contained details on the services that it offered, what its apps were capable of, and in some cases, direct downloads for the archiving app themselves. Now the website is wiped. Neither but Border Patrol, Coinbase, the bank they reference in this, Galaxy Digital, or Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police responded for requests for comment, which in and of itself seems pretty damn weird to me. You know, it's just everything about this is right on the surface. Now, we'll include one of the many articles we've covered on this. This was December 7th, 2024. Israel's global cybersecurity infiltration. And this is there's so many ways we could have gone, and I could include 45 new videos and articles and just showing you how long this has been happening and how clearly they're infiltrating governments. And, it's not just the United States. That's the main point. If we're really starting to pay attention, this goes around the world, which is what I think this adds to it. April 29th from The Nation, 2025. Now, I'm only going to show you a couple quick parts of this. You can read this for yourself. There's a lot in this that I feel is very partisan. That shouldn't be enough for you to disregard just the main overlapping points I think are important. Or maybe you can read it all and think it's all very relevant. It's up to you. The group chat from hell has been exposed. The only point that I'm making in all of this is how obvious this is that this is the same thing. Okay, right now you've got them using Signal on all these weird little chats off to the side of people that are tapped into the highest levels of power of Thiel and Trump and Vance and all the rest. Andreessen is one of those people. And he is basically running all these different chats, as you're going to see in this if you read it all, and essentially kind of corralling the way people think. And then if people go away from that, they drop it and move on. I mean, it's It's not like the idea they always want to profess these values of free speech and open thought and dialogue. And then the moment they have that challenge, they show you that's not what they think about, or not what they care about, rather. And the overlap, of course, is the idea of the signal problem. And then ask yourself whether they're also using this telemessage overlap. Now, I have no information to highlight whether that's the case or not, but it makes the question should be asked. Is this the same thing? Now it says, for anyone thinking that the notorious Signal chat organizing a bombing raid on the Houthis was a one-off lapse of judgment by the people at the center of American power, possibly because it involved Pete Hegseth, Semaphore Media described Ben Smith comes bearing a tale of much larger, more influential mutterings of Signalites. Smith's piece concerns a cluster of ultra-wealthy and or politically connected Silicon Valley plutocrats who, after several earlier forays into unbuckled opinion shaping on secure chat platforms, we now swap critiques on a Signal group chat dubbed Chatham House, of course. After a privacy-conscious international policy think tank based in London, bottom line being you're not allowed to essentially discuss most of what's been going on there other than certain overlapping points. And so the idea is, keep it secret what we're discussing. And it says, like all things involving Silicon Valley, the group name is a symptom of delusional collective self-regard. As he sees it, I tend to agree. The chat's chief ringleader is Mark Andreessen. Remember the one on Joe Rogan who basically argued that what we need is the good elites to save you from the bad ones. Elitists is what they're all called. They're not actually better than you. They think they are. But overlapping that with Karp's book and, this whole, Curtis Yarvin guiding, and it really comes down to the Machiavellian mindset or the ends justify the means or whatever they use to argue that no matter what they do, it's the right thing if they get what they want and claim that means you get what you want. And it's just not the reality. And it's a very simplified discussion of what they're putting forward, but it is, in my opinion, it is just flatly not in your interest. Unless you're willing to sell out to their worldview and live the way that they want you to for their interests. I mean, it's the same as all these oligarchs we're talking about today. Now it says, the chat's chief ringleader, Mark Andreessen, the erstwhile Netscape founder and present-day lord of venture capital, they write, who, as Smith notes, has been instrumental in Silicon Valley's fulsome embrace of Donald Trump. By distilling the ideological leanings of the Silicon Valley elitists, I would add, they say elite, Chatham House and its forerunner chats exert an outsized kind of cultural and political clout, Smith writes, in getting key influencers and business titans on the same page. Quote, their influence flows through Twitter, Substack, podcasts, and constitutes a kind of dark matter of American politics and media. The group chats aren't always primarily a political space, but they are the single most important place in which a stunning realignment toward Donald Trump was shaped and negotiated, and an alliance between Silicon Valley and the new right formed. Now, you could make that about left-right politics. To me, it's not. To me, it's about what really drives what we pretend is, people pretend the elections drive and American people dictate. This is what dictates your future. These are the people that guide very clearly the outcomes of what happened, and they give you two fake selections that you get to decide from. Either way, it benefits their outcome. I mean, let's not forget, guys, what Derek wrote, I think, really nailed it in a lot of the conversations around this, which is that no matter which way this election went, Zionist technocrats versus Zionist technocrats. Literally, you had Karp on one side and Thiel on the other. It's very clear that this was the same outcome. Israel support, technocrat support, it was the same thing no matter who ultimately won this or, they selected in front of you is how I would read it. But the point is these background things, the old... let's even go back before the whole Signal chat dynamic. That's why they went to Bilderberg. That's why they go to these chats, and they set the tone for the coming political theater. The group chats aren't always primarily political space. Yeah, I read all that. And it goes on to say, the Chatham House chats do furnish valuable insight into preferred mode of groupthink endorsed by our digital overlords, as he writes. And not surprisingly, this brand of orthodoxy hinges on the grand conceit that they and their peers are the chosen prime movers of history. They really do see themselves this way. And that dissenters are at best misguided Luddites and at worst power mad and puritanical censors. Now, there's some of all of those things. The point is, though, we can see today that people that aren't are being framed as whatever they can to make you seem like the other. So their agenda continues. And it says what Andreessen is pleased to call his curation of the new national vibe shift. They're cultivating this stuff and it's not hard to see. There is an idea that you don't criticize because what really matters is defeating the left. Now, that's clearly driving a lot of the average person's view trapped in the partisan idea. And the same thing in the other direction. The idea that as long as we are dunking on the left or making them look bad or attacking them or stopping them, we're doing the right thing. It's just lazy and dangerous. Now, it goes on to say in one of the only chat transcripts that he was able to obtain, David Sachs, the hedge fund billionaire who now serves as the AI crypto czar, announces his defection from one of these groups, saying, quote, it's become worthless due to rampant Trump derangement syndrome, triggering in turn the departures of other influential MAGA people that were in the chat, like Tucker Carlson and Tyler Winklevoss. So funny how they make these chats, they group and they're having conversations, but the moment somebody defects or says, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, maybe that's unconstitutional, well, now you're Trump derangement syndrome. That's what we're talking about. And then what that does is shows the rest of the speech, and people want to be included and they want to get their political benefits and their business benefit. So they stay in line, toe the line. I think it's very important to see that this is not unique to Mike Waltz. It's not unique to the inner circle. This is a major problem that is, I think, goes a lot bigger. But you guys can decide. As always, I mean, a lot of things we discuss in the show are things that I'm just putting forward as possibilities. So it ultimately comes down to whether you think, and you can hopefully don't just make an assumption and make that your idea, but that you continue to make notes and wait for more evidence because we don't know. That's the ultimate point. At this point, all we have is data points that suggest that there's an overlap in regard to the telemessage point. And I'll also include these. They mentioned Curtis Yarvin in that article and the connection between that ideology and what Andreessen and Karp and Thiel are all pushing forward. But Derek wrote this February 10th, 2025. Meet the Peter Thiel acolytes in Donald Trump's second administration. And it's insanely obvious how all of them are tied into the same thing. And then, of course, he follows up on that and says, meet the man whose philosophy has influenced Peter Thiel and the technocrats. And it is the same thing we're talking about. It's the same idea. They're clearly driving some kind of new, golden age idea. And that in and of itself, golden age and everything else ties back to all these larger ideas from a long time ago, whether that's the eugenics thread or whether it's the technocrat or, Technocracy Inc. and Elon's family. It's just insanely clear how this stuff connects. Now, on top of that, to the Iran overlap, Responsible Statecraft said Trump fired Waltz because he wanted to attack Iran. Now, that seems to be the general sentiment. I don't agree with that. Certainly is one of the possibilities. And I really hope that's the case because it gives the indication that at least some level of pushback from the Trump administration or Trump himself where they don't want to just blindly attack Iran. I just find that really hard to believe with what they're currently saying and what they've been saying. So I get the sense, my personal opinion, not that I'm proving this, is that this was the framing in order to give a bone to the people that want to believe he's the peace president despite everything else proving the opposite. Or on top of that, then what we're seeing is this sort of game to water down what ultimately happens as if that was the bad version. What we do is the good one. It's all hypothetical considerations. Here is antiwar.com. As always, you should be following. Trump says he wants total dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. Feels like that's a weird word. Dismantlement? Is that even the right word? I guess it is. But the point is, that's what we already heard, right? And if you don't do that, then there will be earth-shattering consequences or whatever he says every time, right? If you don't do that, then we'll how he said it, basically suggesting they'll bomb them. I mean, very clearly like he does every time. Doesn't always mean he will. But that's his style of democracy negotiation, is threatening and taking what they want. But the point is, this is on the 4th, guys. He's basically on top of it all saying, you have to do this or we're going to take action. And what they said last time was, well, we don't want what you're selling. We don't want to negotiate with you. Witkoff was presented and they said he's a meaningless person. They were going through Oman to have some semblance of negotiation. And then Israel, the argument is attacked Iran. That seemed to never really flesh out. What we tend to get long-term is if there is information, it'll come out through Iran and statements in the future. They very rarely seem to act irrationally like the U.S. and Israel do. They're measured in their response. The point, though, is that the bombing, the 2 different explosions we saw right during this time happening seemed very similar to the Beirut explosion, even the same kind of argument. But Iran itself, in some cases, seemed to suggest that it was some kind of a mistake so who knows? Interesting timing, though, isn't it? That as they're in the middle of this, that happens. The point, though, is I don't believe that's an indication that they want to avoid going war with Iran. If you wanted to stop the war with Iran, that's not how you would go about it. especially since the reality of the program, even according to the State Department, is that they're not seeking a nuclear weapon. That's a recent statement, as well as the International Atomic Energy Agency. So all we get, like everything else, whether it's immigration or foreign policy, is that they claim something and everything else shows you the opposite. We're not killing everybody, and here's the genocide. We're not starving everybody. Here's the proof. Every single time. So yet again, Netanyahu and the rest, they're circling a bomb for the last 40 million years. They claim it's been going on, whatever. It's, decades. They've been claiming Iran is seeking a nuclear weapon. 1 month away, we hear all the time, and then it doesn't happen. And the evidence shows it never was. Now, today it's a different dynamic. And of course, it's possible they always have, and we just can't prove it. But then nonetheless, it still comes down to the evidence isn't there. So we shouldn't claim we know. If they had the proof, they would show it to you. But the point is today, the argument's becoming that they're driving them to do so. And then if they do, how can you blame them? The reality is that I've stated repeatedly and proven that they're not doing so. And if they keep saying that we're going to come after you, and as North Korea proved, if they do so, that will cause the shift of the conversation. And on top of all of it, they have a right to do it like literally every other government. So the point is, they're trying to create this conflagration. I can't say that, cause conflict. Mel points out Trump's statements. All purchases of Iranian oil or petrochemical products must stop now. The megalomania here, like the idea that you think you could just dictate what any other country does, including your allies, with another foreign country. It's not illegal to work with Iran because U.S. just decides to say so. It shows you who the real villain is in all this. These are the kind of things that cause these problems, whether or not you think they're, whatever the narrative is they're circulating around. That's a country that has a right to sell and deal with other countries. That is not how this works. But that's how the U.S. government has operated as long as I can remember. And Mel says, so now we're about to stop doing business with China? Oh, that was the point. It says, any country or person who buys any amount of oil or petrochemicals from Iran will be subject immediately to secondary sanctions, which is illegal. You can't, there's no real mechanism through which the U.S. government or any individual country can unilaterally, they can do it, because they control the financial dynamic, but this is supposed to be done through an international body. This shows you they think they're the policemen of the world. So what this is financial terrorism. That's what it is, to get what they want at the expense of anybody and everybody else. They're saying sanctions to everybody who doesn't go along with what we want. They will not be allowed to do business with the United States. That's the point. Mel says, so you're going to stop doing business with China, India, Turkey, the UAE, and about 10 other countries? No. That's not what's going to happen. That is meant to focus on very particular things to people that they want to go after. And it says, how do people put up with this? How does this make Americans more safe and prosperous? It doesn't, is the point, which is her point. But here's Hegseth making the same point. This was on the 30th, of course, so the timing is different, but nonetheless, showing you there are other people in this administration that are unabashedly going after starting war with Iran for Israel. He says, message to Iran, as you've all seen. We talked about it last time. We see your lethal support to the Houthis, which, they are supportive of what they're doing, but there's no evidence to suggest they're literally like dictating the outcome of what's going on there. As I've said forever. And even U.S. government entities have made that case throughout the years. That's not really what's going on. And as luck would have it, interesting to show you, Donald Trump said the same thing. I guess Hegseth forgot or doesn't care. He says, we see your lethal support. We know exactly what you are doing. You know very well what the U.S. military is capable of, and you were warned. It's so funny how much they think that matters, people in the world. It's embarrassing. You will pay the consequences at a time and place of our choosing. The hubris is insane. Now, the crazy thing is they've said this to the Houthis in Yemen many times now. If you do that one more time, we will, and then they bomb them. Nothing stops, doesn't even hurt them, as they've shown many times over that they're very resilient. And ultimately, I don't think the U.S. knows what they're aiming at. And then they go, you do it again. We are the strongest in the world. As always, the person pounding their chest going, I'm so strong, is probably not that strong. And Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com says an important thing to understand is that the Houthis, really the Ansarallah movement, make their own missiles, as we've been saying for years on this show. Even Trump has acknowledged this. That means they're not reliant on Iran for military support. What Hegseth is saying is just phony pretext for war. Here's Trump.
And they're experts on missiles. I mean, they actually make missiles. Nobody thought that, but they make missiles.
Yeah, we all did. Anybody that's not dumb or who's not just blindly following the corporate media narrative, we already knew that. I've been talking about it for years. But funny how people are, It just shows you the kind of hierarchy of where people are in the world and what news they're listening to. And some of these inner circle partisan dynamics, they think they are more informed than anybody, and they have like 1% of the conversation.
Highly sophisticated, and they're very tough, but they've been very badly damaged. Nobody else was able to do that but us. Pete, you want to discuss that?
Oh, yeah, I gotta love his bombastic nature. They're very badly damaged. No, they're not, and they haven't even, not even a blip. They're continuing what they're doing, and I'll show you in a second. Or that no one else has been able to do what you didn't actually do. It's just this funny game he always plays. It's just, you have to, this is what people like me, and it's not left or right. As much as you people want to carve it in, I criticize Biden the same way, but the funny thing is how much he tends to do that. And then you can't recognize that that's just a lie, at least a fudging of the truth, which then happens in everything he does. And then you act like, oh, he was just being off the cuff. No, he was lying to you. That's what that looks like. That's a lie. No, they didn't destroy them, and no, they weren't the only one to ever do what you didn't actually do. It's just sad. But and every time he kicks it off to somebody, not in this case, but it's their responsibility, right? Pam Bondi said that, it wasn't me. Like, it's always the kind of thing he's been doing. Or early on, Marco Rubio, that's the one. Talk to him. And Emily Nemzak, that's all him. Remember that? These people know what they're doing. They're trying to avoid at least what may end up being some accountability. Same point with that message from Hegseth. Glenn pointing out the same message. Greenwald says in 2024, Trump condemned Biden for bombing Yemen. Oh, yeah, did we forget about that? At least then, Houthis were attacking U.S. ships. They stopped with the Gaza ceasefire. As we pointed out many times, now the U.S. is in a sustained war against the Houthis and vowing war with Iran over it. Did Trump voters want more Middle East wars? I heard otherwise. Obvious, the point is, they stop pretty much every time there's a ceasefire because the only thing this is about is stopping the genocide. And as far as I can tell, unless somebody can prove me wrong, because I've been looking at this and following this since it started, I don't see any casualties at all. I don't see them stealing anything. It's all about deterrence. That's what deterrence actually looks like. And they stop when there's a ceasefire. And all they can do is scream pirates because that's what they are. This is a meme I put out that I thought was funny because it's very real. How they want you to think pirates look, a pirate or a Houthi, Ansarallah, and how pirates actually look. Trump, Marco Rubio, and Biden. That's the truth. I'll include that for you. I mean, the truth is I see it anyway. And of course, then we have people that are trying to support this. Or interesting, I would argue that's the case. Charlie Kirk puts out a poll that says, should America bomb or support Israel bombing Iran's nuclear facilities? 1.6 million people, over almost 150,000 votes, 69.6% said no. So I just want you to really digest this, that there is nobody who wants this. I mean, that's not accurate. I mean, it's against the majority. Like, there are people who are saying yes to this are the vast minority in the conversation. When I say nobody, I mean like the partisan side, the left, the right, people that are aware it's all a childish lie. We all don't want this. Iran war or any more war. And the point is that nonetheless, they're acting like it's an ongoing conversation, or maybe we'll do that. They don't care what you think, guys. That has to be so clear by now. But people want to believe Trump was different this time, even though we've already done this and we were there last time. And, it's nothing different. I hope it is. I always have. But we have to start being honest with what's happening. Gunther Eagleman, one of these million follower plus blind Trump supporters, says Iran effed around in finding the Houthis and funding the Houthis. Not what's happening. Trump is now going to let them find out, like these lazy old tropes and memes they're using. It's just so funny. F around and find out. I mean, that could happen for the fifth time. We destroyed them again, and they keep fighting back and stopping what we're doing. These people are just cheerleaders for their partisan side. And it's embarrassing. That's why they get millions of followers, because that's a shtick that works. You pick a side today, oh my God, you'll get lots. Go on Twitter and start yelling certain narratives, you'll make lots of money. Or you can be honest, that's what I prefer. But of course, it's all purchase of oil must stop. So your argument is Iran funded the Houthis. And so he's going to stop everybody in the world from dealing with Iran's oil. Oh, you mean just like every other administration going back as far as you want to look for Israel? We've seen the same thing. Nothing new, bud. Eagleman, you should recognize you're just falling for the new framing for the same old attempt to do the same old thing that we've always seen happening. Or he doesn't care at all because it's about what is working for the grift. At the end of the day, F around and find out, are the evidence, who cares about facts or evidence or legalities or congressional approval for war? Nah, those are all old school things, old dumb Democrat stuff. It's like, where are we? How are we being ruled by the children in the room? I don't know. Now, overall, a few things from the Yemen conversation that are important. Yemen, this is according to Daniela Modas. May 2nd. Yemen announced banning U.S. crude oil exports starting on the 17th of May. Now, obviously, this is playing a factor for why the U.S. is trying to focus more here, because that will be a problem for them. Now, this overlaps with what's going on to what Israel's doing. I think I actually included a tweet about that. Yeah. She says fleets of companies will be prohibited from crossing the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean. Companies violating the ban were placed on the sanctions list for perpetrators of aggression against Yemen. Very interesting. Now, remember, they have shown themselves to be not just restrained, but tactful with this. They're not hurting, they're not killing or hurting people. They're not stealing. This is about restraint and deterrence, excuse me. So this is going to be a problem for the U.S. government, which I think is why this is happening now. Or like what the expansion of the agenda is because of this is one more thing they're adding to it. Now, what's interesting is with the great Ryan Grimm frames this. Here's an Israeli official. Yemen's military announces that in response to Israel's plans to expand its operations in Gaza, which we'll touch on the very next show, which maybe since he says that, let me see if I can grab it real quick for you. There's one part to include that is important, which just has to do simply with, where was that? There it is. Israel, Gaza, and what's going to happen here. Now this, Israel approves conquering Gaza, holding territories, ahead of Trump's Middle East trip, knowing that's about to happen, right? So then Trump being there signifies to the world that he's okay with everything that's happening. And of course he is, because I don't think he has a choice at this point. But his officials told local media, the cabinet approved expanding their anti-Hamas operations to, quote, conquering Gaza, holding the territories. Oh yeah, you mean like they always have been planning? Tens of thousands of extra reservists have been called up. Many of them aren't showing up, which is the point. But realize, guys, this is exactly what we always told you was happening, always what they wanted to happen, that they've told you, Greater Israel, occupation of Gaza, taking it back. And every day we were told by the mainstream media and the mainstream alternative Trump supporters, no, that's a lie and an anti-Semitic trope. Here we are. And by the way, also killing their own hostages. The people that are still there, that they're still going to be hurting by not bringing food in for over 80 days or however long it's been. How do you not recognize what that shows you? They could have gotten them back 75 times over by just going through with the deal that they already agreed to. Wild. I'll include that. I'll touch on it in the next conversation. And there's also this here. I might as well just play this too, since it's interesting timing, since we're not too long today. Ryan Grimm shared a video of Netanyahu saying basically the overview for what was going on way back in the beginning of this. And what Ryan Grimm said, it's interesting to watch this speech from more than a year ago and try to find a single sentence that is not demonstrably and obviously false. I don't think there's a single one in it. Let's listen to that quick and then we'll come back to where we were. Oops, that's on the wrong shot anyway. Hold on. Well, first, Ryan Grimm said, according to Israel, as quoted in the New York Times today, it is legal to block food from population, right? That's what they're claiming anyway, and bar them from traveling. Yemen now says that it will shut down air traffic to Israel in response to Israel shutting off all the ground and air and sea in Gaza. Now, my stance would always be the same on this. If you're going to say one is okay or one's not okay, then the other's not either, even if it's in response to doing the same thing. So my point, though, is that you have to understand that you can logically understand why they're doing this or why they're reacting to these things. I made this point before about stopping shipping lanes and so on. Now, that changed, of course, when the international community made it a crime to support them. Then you can argue what they were doing was in line with international law. But overall, it's important to draw those lines. Now, what they're doing is simply going, okay, if you're going to do this and you're going to basically starve people to death, then you're telling us and telling the world, which they've made an actual case for now, that we're allowed to do that. So therefore, we are too. And so what they're doing is, you're going to see in a second that they have already attacked the Ben Gurion Airport. Before that, let me play this clip back to what Ryan was saying in general. It's interesting to watch this and find a single sentence in this that is not a lie.
I want to make a few points absolutely clear. Israel has no intention of permanently occupying Gaza or displacing its civilian population. Israel is fighting Hamas terrorists, not the Palestinian population. And we are doing so in full compliance with international law. The IDF is doing its utmost to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas is doing its utmost to maximize them by using Palestinian civilians as human shields. The IDF urges Palestinian civilians to leave war zones by disseminating leaflets, making phone calls, providing safe passage corridors, while Hamas prevents Palestinians from leaving at gunpoint and often with gunfire.
Literally everyone.
Our goal is to rid Gaza of Hamas terrorists and free our hostages. Once this is achieved, Gaza can be demilitarized and de-radicalized, thereby creating a possibility for a better future for Israel and Palestinians alike.
Wow. I mean, just think about that overlap today. Literally every single thing he said, you can prove is a lie. Every one of them. By their own statements, by their own actions, like right now, saying we're going to take all of Gaza, which has always been the plan, seeing as how they had names for new settlements that were written out before this even started, which you could easily prove. Now, the point is going forward that Yemen is responding in kind. Now, this was as of May 4th, a missile fired from Yemen struck an access road. See, I think that's by design, like we've seen in many of these, to make sure they're not, if they bombed a big area in the middle of Tel Aviv, then I would argue that would give them the justification to respond. Now, it still may do that. Israel very clearly, like the U.S., always shows that it will go way over the top. But interesting time, and at the very least, they can argue that we didn't, so they bombed an access road on the grounds of Israel's Ben Gurion Airport on Sunday, as a heavy U.S. bombing campaign has failed to deter Yemen's Houthis, or officially known as Ansarallah. So they bombed the airport, but doesn't appear to be any casualties, and the point seems to be a demonstration. Now, Dave DeCamp, after this, Ben Netanyahu says, President Trump is right. Attacks by the Houthis emanate from Iran. See, he's towing the line, guys. You can quite literally prove that at the very least, this is simply, like what we're talking about is support from all of these entities for people being oppressed. So if you're going to make the argument that Iran are the Houthis, then the same argument made for literally anybody else in the world is supporting Iran's effort to push back against this, or the Yemen Houthis' effort to push back against this. Because their argument, though, is that this is Iran. And yet, every single time over the last decade I've been covering this, they don't prove that. They just rely on the insinuation. And why is that? Like everything else we're talking about? Because they know they can't prove it. It's the same thing every time. Now, again, as I've always said, that's not to say that it could not be the case. Maybe it is. Either way, though, it wouldn't be a crime and would not justify what they're doing. But it says, seems like Netanyahu is going to use this Yemeni strike to try and get his U.S.-Iran war. The same thing they just told you that Mike got removed from the cabinet, Waltz, because they don't want that. I don't believe that. No, let nobody be fooled, he says. The hundreds of attacks made by the Houthis and the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen. Are you kidding me? The starving to death families that you've been starving well back in your last administration, Biden after you, well before that as well, thugs and monsters. It's the same thing they keep doing every time. You send 75% of people with no criminal records to El Salvador. Well, rapists, thugs, human traffickers, and every one of them. That's what they said every time. Because their blind followers will go along with the narrative. It's just so gross how obvious it all is. And lastly, 14 reported injured by U.S. airstrikes on the Yemeni capital. Yet again, another blatant war crime bombing the civilian densely populated Sana'a area in the capital of Yemen. Why? Because how dare you do anything that hurts Israel? I just think it's incredible, guys. And of course, killing civilians, hurting people, destroying but no, you bomb a road, then we're going to kill everybody. That's the typical response you get from the U.S.-Israel apparatus. Lastly, when we're talking about the violation of rights, let's make sure we don't forget that Trump is still telling you that at the very least, he's willing to violate your rights. Now, first place I saw this was High Impact Flicks. He does a little 8-minute breakdown you can watch for yourself, but he's talking about what Trump said in that interview we played to start. Now, also, by the way, I don't know if you saw this. I just sense he has it in the picture. Trump literally posted this. This is on his Truth Social account. He posts himself as the Pope. Now, of course, that comes back to the fact that Lindsey Graham, whether joking or not, just said, keep up an open mind about making Trump the Pope. Now, again, like my gut instinct would be, that's obviously a joke. He's trying to troll people. But I thought that about Trump thinking MS-13 were actually on that guy's knuckles, and he actually thought they were. I mean, I gave him the benefit of the doubt because I thought, who would actually think that? Apparently he did. Same thing here. Well, maybe it's a troll to start, but who knows how these things go with how absolutely cartoonish things are today. Either way, I don't think that's actually something that's going to happen. No, that's just what that was there for. Here is the article. Trump asked if he has to uphold the Constitution. He says, I don't know. Now, yes, he has more to say after that. I'll play it all for you. But realize how insane that is. That's what Brian's basically just just can't even understand how it's possible. You can have a president who's standing there answering, like he says, imagine, I'll just read it. He says, MAGA would have lost their minds if Biden or Obama had said this about the Constitution. And you damn well know that's true. He says, I bet Alex Jones will offer to shine Trump's shoes and wipe his butt even more after this because, of course, this was a brilliant 5D chess move to own the libs. See, he gets it. It's obvious how this keeps going, and that's all you need. Right? You violate someone's rights, pretend it's a move to make the libs look bad. It's so easy to play some of these people right now. Let's watch it. Now, I'll let me see. I may stop it once or twice, but we'll play. It's only 2.5 minutes. We'll play it. I think there's some important parts to make, but the overarching point here, guys, is that he is telling you point blank that at the very least, it's not sure. The shall not be infringed inherent rights, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that in and of itself, regardless of the narrative that fills in after that, is mind-blowing. That how much this has shifted. How the people who were screaming about inherent rights are now the ones going, but when this happens, exactly like the left was during COVID-19. You guys are the same.
Let's talk about this because obviously you've had a back and forth with the Supreme Court. In a 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court directed your administration to facilitate the return. You've talked about this in the past of Kilmar Abrego Garcia from a prison in El Salvador whose deportation your administration called an administrative error. You said in a recent interview you could bring him back, but you won't. Are you defying the Supreme Court, sir?
No, I'm relying on the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, who's very capable, doing a great job.
Oh, well, that makes me feel better. He's letting Pam Bondi make the decisions because she's clearly very intelligent. I mean, come on, that's insane to me for many reasons. But what's crazy about that is not just that he's basically saying she's the one deciding that, but that's accountability. I really think a lot of that's what it's about. Saying, well, no, she's the one. I'm listening to what she tells me to do. Well, that doesn't change anything. So that either means that neither of you understand the Constitution or you're using who as a scapegoat. Because what we're talking about is absolute. Shall not be infringed. Does not apply to whether or not. Now, let's be clear. We're talking about Supreme Court ruling, first of all. And that was that they should get due process, which is enshrining, outlining what is already the reality. But just because you want to try to make some weird nuanced argument about why that doesn't mean what everybody knows it means, it just shows you're dishonest. That's all it is. And this is literally about whether or not he should uphold the Constitution. That's all this comes down to, is some kind of argument or dehumanization or some kind of emotional plea that makes you feel that it's okay to ignore the Constitution in this circumstance. So as I keep saying, if you think that, then just be honest about it, that you think the Constitution is not absolute, that there are moments where the government can say, except when this happens, and then be okay when it happens next time, when the Democrats do it, or whoever else.
Because I'm not involved in the legality or the illegality. I have lawyers to do that, and that's why I have a great DOJ. We have a great one. We had a very corrupt one before. Now we have a great one.
Okay, so that's, again, the lazy argument. Well, because see, now Democrats are bad, and we're not Democrats. So this is whatever I do is good. Not everybody falls for that. I hope to God, not the majority, but a lot of people do. Right? As long as you frame it as, like Brian was just saying, right, that this is the opposite of what they were doing, then it must be the good thing.
And they're not viewing the decision the way you said it. They don't view it that way at all. They think it's a totally different decision.
Well, right. So basically meaning that everyone can read what that says and they just pretend it means something else, which is not new at all. That's how these people have operated for a very long time. They abuse this system.
You say you have the power to bring him back, though. Your attorney general says, quote, that's up to El Salvador. Just to put a fine point on this, do you have the power to bring Abrego Garcia back as the Supreme Court?
Well, I have the power to ask for him to come back.
So somebody trained him on this, right? Because he said more than once, I can do that. I just don't want, I'm not going to. So somebody has clearly said, you can't say it like that. You have to, this is how you're supposed to. Now, this is an evolution of them trying to avoid accountability. But point is, he can ask. So he doesn't want to say either I can't do that because that makes him feel inadequate, that he's not in control of everything. But if he says he can, well, that puts him in a legal position. So typical Trump, right down the middle, let you assume whichever way you want. That's how he does this.
The power to ask for him to come back if I'm instructed by the Attorney General that it's legal to do so. But the decision as to whether or not he should come back will be the head of El Salvador. He's a very capable man.
Whether he's legally allowed to, I mean, think about how stupid that is. So if Trump right now brought back Garcia, you want to point out for me who it is that's going to go illegal? Who? Show me. Who's going to then jump up and say what you did was wrong? The Supreme Court ruled that he had to. The reality is they admitted it was an administrative error. So there's literally nobody on any side that's saying that it's illegal for him to bring him back except them. So they're manufacturing their own argument for why they don't bring it back. It's just childish. He's just using this lazy excuse because people will. It's like we've always said with team sports. This is team sport politics, right? When you know your guy was offsides, but you don't want to lose, you're cheering on the fact that the refs called it the other way. That's what this is. You're giving them the ammunition to argue why it's okay, but you know you're wrong. Guys, you know this is not the case. The point is, if you're going to claim
come back will be the head of El Salvador. He's a very capable man.
Oh, right. He's not
that it's legal to do so.
Yeah, so he needs Pam Bondi to tell him whether or not it's illegal for him to bring him back. Well, did you have the conversation? Are we pretending like you guys are still figuring that out? Right? I mean, he didn't say one way or the other. Otherwise, he'd say, well, I'm not going to because it is illegal. He's acting like it's still up in the air. This is just a sidestep. I don't know. This is why I often point out why these hacks that are in the corporate media don't even try to do their jobs. Or they're so hyper-focused on the partisan divide issues that there's a wide open gap right there. They don't take it.
But the decision as to whether or not he should come back will be the head of El Salvador. He's a very capable man.
Well, and your Attorney General has said the issue is with that word facilitate. Will you seek clarification from the Supreme Court? Do you need to go back to the Supreme Court?
We may do that. I was asking about that. We may do that.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree?
That's Marco Rubio. And of course, he's doing that because he's trying to let out some steam, I think, and he doesn't want to be on the table for what comes next, my opinion. But he did say that. And then went on to give you the same old arguments about how you can't stop us from deporting, and no one's trying to do that. This is about the illegal use of the act and the lack of due process, no matter what the other conversation is. And as I said before, there are still people being deported. So they're acting like you're stopping us from doing the thing that we're actually still doing. They're trying to conflate the criminal acts they're doing. No, if you actually had presented the evidence, which is not a trial, the way he frames it in this, in fact, there's evidence, even with the warrant conversation, the way things work, it's not days and per weeks. Apparently it can be up to a half an hour in some cases. The point is, overall, this is an abuse of the situation, right? They're taking advantage of what you understand.
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment.
Asking about that. We may do that.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
How can you possibly say that? And I'll play the rest. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. It's a fundamental fact. Judges anywhere will tell you that. The law will tell you that. Grok will tell you that. I'll show you the things yet again next. Right? Reno versus Flores. What the other one was, I'll show you in a second. The one that Grok references, all of which tell you, yes, without question, guys, illegal aliens have constitutional rights. In particular, Reno versus Flores, deportation right, win deportation. And all it means is that they have to just verify what they're saying is correct. Why you think doesn't have to happen? All that means, as always, is then they can just claim you are an illegal alien. Right? They catch you out in the wilderness while you're camping. You don't have your identification, and they go, "You're an illegal alien," and they rush you off to El Salvador. Well, they didn't have to prove anything because there's no due process for illegal aliens, right? Yes, that sounds like an abstract reality. The point is that they can find ways to go after whoever they want if you give them an opening where they don't have to prove what they're saying. When did it ever come to pass that Republicans, of all people, were of the mind that the government didn't need to verify what it's accusing people of? Whether it is an alien, a green card holder, Visa card holder, or an American citizen, the principle is exactly the same. And this is the watering down of this in a very dangerous way at a very dangerous time. I think I'm going to let the rest play.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says.
I don't know. It seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials. We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth. Some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But
damn it, I've got to comment on that. I'm sorry, I thought there was no more points, but you guys all know I'm going to do it anyway. What you were elected for is sort of irrelevant because you're not going to pretend like everyone has the same ideas about what they want. But overall, the simple point is you point to the fact that you were elected and act like that rationalizes you to do whatever you want. It is a bad argument.
Courts are holding me from doing it.
And no, they're not. The courts are not holding you from deporting anybody. The courts are saying that you have to give due process in which has always been the reality, guys. That's why this has been going on in the past. That's why they have these hearings. The point is they're just trying to argue they want it to be different because they know that to meet what they argue they want to accomplish, they can't do it this way. So as I keep saying, they want something. They realize the Constitution is a hinder for them or a block for them to do it the way they want. So they manufacture a justification for why that shouldn't apply in this moment. It's like every other conversation we've had. If you give them the excuse to say the Constitution suddenly doesn't apply, it will never be real. And that we've been there for a long time, you understand. This is the extension of that problem. If it is repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. Every day we see things that are repugnant to the Constitution. And now we've got the President of the United States telling you that it doesn't even necessarily apply. And then she asked point blank about whether he should defend it at all, like you heard. And he says, I don't know. And don't forget, 5 times he has floated the idea of sending Americans to foreign prisons.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me.
So you'll use them to work around the Constitution. That's all that means. It's not wiggle room. It shall not be infringed. They're very clear. You're talking about using them to maneuver around what is inherent.
And they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
Right. So everyone can understand what it means, and you guys can claim to think otherwise, and all your followers will say the same thing, and then you just leave it there. So you could do that with everything forever, and that's where this is. And unless Congress is willing to step up and force in the Supreme Court ruling, which everyone knows what they're asking, everybody, everywhere, he's pretending not, he's pretending he doesn't, then if Congress not step up and do something about it, then there is no law. The president could do whatever he wants. Like this is why people argue this could be the beginning of the actual end of what this system is. Well, and maybe that's what people want. I mean, the bottom line, though, is you have to be honest about what is happening in front of us.
Is anyone in your administration right now in contact with El Salvador about returning Abrego Garcia to the United States?
I don't know. You'd have to ask the Attorney General that question.
Wow. So Trump doesn't even know, which I don't agree with. I think he's lying. That is about making it all about Pam Bondi, and she's the one, talk to her. You really think he doesn't know what's going on? That seems wild. That seems naive to think that's the case. But guys, I mean, this is very clear. He's simply trying to sidestep the reality of it by acting like, well, it's a nuanced conversation. That's not what I heard the Supreme Court say. He's playing you. And if you're willing to go along with that, then you're okay with people lying. And maybe you are. Maybe you don't care. Maybe it's all about dunking on the Democrats. If that's the case, I don't know why you're here, because that's crazy. And that is juvenile. The problem, though, guys, is that this is being seeded, driven by people that are not here for American interests, like Zionist Stephen Miller. He says 9 hours ago, the right of due process, which I'm not sure why that's in quotes, that's an interesting thing to reflect on, is to protect citizens from their government, not to protect foreign trespassers from removal. Due process guarantees the rights of a criminal defendant facing prosecution, not an illegal alien facing deportation. Flatly incorrect. So again, like I said, I think that's where this comment was. Either he doesn't know that or he's lying. I'm not sure which one terrifies me more. But what's crazy about it, protect citizens from their government, not foreign trespassers. Okay, Stephen Miller, let's play with this. How do you know they're foreign trespassers? Not a trick question. Right? So you'll claim that, right? But what if you're wrong? We've already seen most, it seems, of these people you sent you were wrong about, right? Or lied about. So the interesting thing is, how do you know they're actually, well, you'd have to have evidence to prove that, right? And then do you just show that to yourself? No, you have to present that to be able to make the argument for why legally he should be removed. Because for all we know, he's an American citizen. 4 times I've covered where they've arrested American citizens that they accuse of being illegal aliens that turn out not to be. And 2 of them were seconds away from going to El Salvador if the Supreme Court hadn't stopped them. So you have to realize we would have already had American citizens deported, and not the children, 18 plus, being sent there because they were brown, without identification, and had either tattoos or not, just in the wrong place. That's not a joke. There's an 18-year-old kid who was here legally that is currently in El Salvador because he was in the wrong place. The ICE agent was heard saying, that's not the one. The leader said, take him anyway. He's never coming back. How do we not see what this is? So they should be obviously proving what they're saying because, 1, they're either lying or wrong half the time, but overall, because that's just how this works. And it says, Alexander, random guy on Twitter, calling out the Deputy Chief of Staff and Policy for Homeland Security and Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor. Apparently, the guy's in the kind of administrating this whole immigration policy. Now we see why this is obviously happening. Zionism driving the whole thing. And he goes, no, the 14th Amendment prohibits depriving, quote, any person, which is how it reads, of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Supreme Court has held the right to due process extends to all human beings in the United States, regardless of citizenship. Yeah, this is very easy to prove. Here it is. Constitution. This is on constitution.congress.gov. He says, April 7th, 2025, the court ruled that, quote, detainees subject to removal under orders under the AEA that's the Alien Enemies Act, are entitled to notice and an opportunity to challenge their removal, otherwise known as due process. That's right here. You think Miller doesn't know that? Guys, this is a very, very disgustingly dishonest person who knows what he's doing, who's literally working, in my opinion, for a foreign government to undermine this country's rights, or really in particular, as it outlines anybody's rights. That's the reality of it. That's why it was enshrined and outlined as inherent God-given rights that would have existed whether or not they wrote them down on that piece of hemp paper. Now, Doge, of course, steps in, Doge AI, and responds to Stephen Miller and says, due process exists to protect American citizens from government overreach, not to shield illegal aliens who violate our laws. Wrong. Like these are, this is supposed to be the Doge AI automated response. So clearly we can see how AI can be manipulated. That's flatly incorrect, and it's easy to prove. But here he is speaking up because they have a coordinated agenda, which is not for American interests. How could we not see this by now? Lastly, I simply said the obvious. Well, Grok says you're a liar or uneducated. Not sure which is more alarming. I'm no way arguing Grok is somebody you should be blindly listening to. But I think it's even more interesting that if, of all places, Grok is saying, yes, illegal aliens have the right to due process under the U.S. Constitution. And Stephen Miller, at the highest levels of power in the current administration, is going, that's not true. That should be chilling. And here's just Reno versus Flores, where it says the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings. That Scalia is the one that pointed this out. So, as always, it's incredible that we're here. That right now, it seems that most Americans are clearly aware of this. These are things that you could have brought up in circles of anybody's political standing a decade ago, and it would have been like, well, obviously. But somehow we've gotten to a point to where an Israeli agenda has taken over this country to the point to where we are shooting ourselves in both feet. It's time to wake up, or we're not going to be able to come back from this. And that happens. That's with globalism. That's with technocracy. We've been saying this, around the technocratic drive, the Great Reset. These are fundamental truths at this point. They're literally showing you how we're going to drive us into some, Chinese emulated social credit dynamic and everything else they're building. You couple that with the idea of an apartheid Zionist maniacal agenda, that goes well beyond just a terrifying reality. All of this could go in a lot of different ways. All I care about is that you know what the information, you can decide for yourself and make informed decisions, and that you do so in a way that is, at least as I would desire, that is in the interest of kindness, compassion, human empathy, that we are being driven by a lot of people out there that act like that's somehow archaic or childish or naive or woke Democrat. It's disgusting that we're being driven by people that clearly are acting against your interests and telling you that by saying anything about it, you're being weak. They know how to play people, guys, and it's obvious they're playing at the weakest amongst us, so stand up and fight for them, even though they don't know you're fighting for them. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.